And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. Oh, what a fantastic crowd we have out there and the ideas from already. Of course, tonight I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, out in the Milky Way tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the release was all about space, space, space. And the UFO file, it came from the Trump administration, part 2 of the tranche of UFO videos and documents that were promised by Trump going forward with the Defense Department and intelligence agencies and all the rest of it. And of course, we welcome the kind of transparency it represents. In general, from what I've seen, and I've looked at most of the videos at this point, it's the kind of thing where you kind of follow a dot on the screen and it's like, what did our sensors pick up? So they're way, as in some 50, 60, 70 years ahead of us on this tip. So, you know, some of them are interesting. Some we've seen before, very much like the first batch, actually, just like 2 weeks ago, May 8th and now May 22nd. They seem to be doing it on Fridays, which is great for us because, of course, we do the X series on Fridays. If you get a UFO release on the X series day, whoa, that's a double whammy. But we have a very exciting show for you tonight because we're going to go deep, deep, deep into the missing scientist story and the UFO file in relationship to it to see where we are here in 2026 with the rollout and somewhat clumsy rollout of disclosure coming out of the White House and the intelligence agencies. Of course, the groups in the intelligence agencies coming out with more spin than files. And we're going to find out all about the CIA agents like John Ramirez and Lou Elizondo who are trying to attach themselves to different stories like the missing scientist story or alien hybrids now. John Ramirez is all about, hey, he's found alien DNA in human beings. Hey, hey. What do you think of that?
I hadn't heard that one yet.
Not only that, but he's an abductee. He's a CIA abductee. Whoa. Well, the whole idea, see, is that an average person who has an alien experience or an out-of-body experience, whatever it happens to be, that's an abductee, can't be allowed to be the authority on these matters. So they have to actually have CIA agents who are beholden to the agencies, like Jim Semivan, like John Ramirez, who now claim, oh, I'm being abducted. I'm the one being abducted. I'm not investigating anymore. No, no, no. They're actually abductees, and I'm sure eventually they'll be shown little CIA half-hybrid alien children, too. We're just not buying it. And particularly bad are the intel agents mogging around the missing scientist story. It's actually quite gross the way they're doing it. I'm going to show you that tonight, especially in the figure of the resurrection of Lou Elizondo from complete disgraced counterintelligence rat to champion of the missing scientists. We have to get to the truth. I'm going to show you what some of those missing scientists thought about Mr. Counterintelligence CIA Lou Elizondo tonight, and including the fact that one of them was very blatant about it. Lou is evil. So that's not the spokesman you want out there talking about this. And of course, he laid back on it. He didn't do anything about it until he figured out how it could serve his purposes. And now, of course, guess what, Miss Olivia? It's Lou. He's the one who's in danger.
Yeah.
Well, he's willing to take the slings and arrows for his country for the UFO file. Lou is straight out of bad casting, and I mean the worst kind of central casting for this. And the truth is, it's an interesting thing with the CIA because over and over again, they've rolled him out there. And there's somebody in that CIA thing who thinks that Lou can pull it off because they've been rolling him out for years. He gets discredited. He goes off the reservation. He threatens people. He does whatever he does as a bad actor and a counterintelligence agent. And then they roll him right back out. And they're like, maybe it'll stick this time. Maybe he's the hero of the missing scientist story, not a counterintelligence liar about a UFO threat that we want to launch on the public. Well, we're going to get into it all tonight in this very special X-Series episode, 226, Missing Scientists Underground, CIA UFO File Disclosure Trap. And you have to really separate the two because you have the real UFO file. You want the real disclosure around that, but it bifurcates because you got to split off and you get this other thing, which is the CIA circuses in town with all their whistleblowers and all the rest of it. That's the thing that we need to isolate, alienate, and kind of remove the cancer from the entire thing. And that's the key to this. I want to remind everyone also that we're going to be taking your questions in the second half of tonight's very special episode. We're also going to go deep into the resignation of Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence and her understudy, Amaryllis Fox Kennedy. Yes, the daughter-in-law of RFK Jr. He also took a hike on all this. Her for the direct reason of the Iran war and maybe other things, and Tulsi for an illness in her family. But it's very interesting with Tulsi because, of course, even 2 months before this, we had the kind of vultures and piranhas on the sides, the lower loomers and all the rest of it saying, oh no, Tulsi's out, Tulsi's out. And Joe Kent, who bailed out of the administration because he couldn't, in good conscience, follow their policy on the Iran war. And he made the right decision in relation to that. So we're going to get all into this tonight, but I think it's interesting because he was saying already that Tulsi and Amaryllis were being left out of all of that Iran part because the administration knew. So it's like that Rubio-Hegseth wing has won out over the more level-headed. And I think we're going to see people like, RFK Jr. kind of standing by, and he's not going to do anything. He's not going to quit or anything, but we're seeing his allies dwindle in that administration. That's a very important sea change, and it's not good for America, and it's not good for the administration at all. It's showing the neocon forces are gaining further and further upper hands there. That plays in dramatically with the Golden Dome and, of course, all these UFO file releases. We're going to get into all of it tonight in our very, very special episode. Before I go any further, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Mike Fax says, excited for tonight, DJ Ferevs. And Free Wheezy says, this is really a life-changing program. Thank you so much, Miss Olivia, DJ, and Ideas Room.
Fantastic. Well, I've said this before. We get such a synergistic response with the Ideas Room and the people who follow and subscribe to the show. And it's that synergy of the exchange of ideas and interest and all the rest of it that really makes all the difference. I want to kick things off rather unusual bit here with Amaryllis Fox and Tulsi. We have to connect some dots that are uncomfortable because when stories go up and come down, they get inflated like a balloon and then deflated like a balloon. So we have to know who's doing that process. But about a week and a half ago, we had a story rolling around out there from a whistleblower on a different matter before James Comer on doing a whole, kind of congressional intelligence hearing. And in the middle of it, he talks about the CIA going in, this is an intelligence officer, going in and seizing 40 boxes from the DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, and also seizing files related to MK Ultra and the JFK assassination. Now, this is the CIA doing this. It's very interesting because, of course, we were promised in 2025 all the CIA records are going to come out and all the rest of it. And they did release a significant amount, but apparently held back these 40 boxes, which Gabbard had obtained. Now, upon hearing this, we got this whole business about, Representative Luna saying it was a raid on her office. Now, in fact, they did go there and take the boxes. The thing that the administration took umbrage to was the idea of a raid, but nonetheless, the boxes were taken. Boxes gone, files missing. Did CIA raid Tulsi Gabbard's office before JFK MK Ultra files went public? Fresh political row has erupted in the U.S. after claims sensitive JFK and MK Ultra files were removed from Tulsi Gabbard's office during declassification efforts. Now, the guy who went on board about this was absolutely solid intelligence whistleblower talking about the various malfeasance going on inside the agency. This is what was going down now a week and a half ago. Keep that in mind. Now, follow this next little bit. John Phelan forced out as Navy Secretary after 13 months. You got the Secretary of the Navy. He's taking a hike. He's taking a bath. He's out. Something going on there. He's not going along with the Iran program. He's not going along with the Golden Dome program. He's out. Okay, so Tulsi rated, feeling out. Keep rolling here. And let's also remember that in the case of the Gabbard records we're talking about, it's relating directly to the President Kennedy's assassination and, of course, the CIA's involvement in it. Okay, so this is the nature of the problem. 62 years, you hold those records up, then you say, oh, I'm giving everything freewheeling. But then Gabbard has some kind of intelligence mole inside there that tells her where to go. And she gets her hands on 40 boxes of JFK records that aren't in the official list. This is what people are missing. And then the MK Ultra files are kind of a bonus on top of that. The CIA finds out about it, and they use a very obscure rule about chain of custody to take the boxes back. Well, we want the boxes back. All right, what's the next thing that takes place? Amaryllis Fox Kennedy, Gabbard ally, leaves 2 jobs in the administration. Daughter-in-law of RFK Jr. held top posts in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the Office of Management. In fact, she was a kind of deputy to Tulsi. She's out. It's like Tulsi's out. This happened just a couple of days ago. So you have the raid on the office, you have the ousting of the Navy Secretary, and then this arrangement to remove Tulsi Gabbard for family reasons. All of this going down basically within a week. Amaryllis Fox Kennedy, that people familiar said, has also helped lead the push to declassify historical documents about the assassination of President Kennedy and Senator Robert F. Kennedy, of course, the father of the Health and Human Services Secretary. Now, let's take it back in time a little bit. We're going to go to December 13th, 2024. RFK Jr. reportedly wants Amaryllis Fox Kennedy at CIA to quote, get to the bottom of JFK's assassination. That's what she was doing in there. That's what she was sent in for. She's ousted. Tulsi's boxes are taken. Navy Secretary fired. Starting to feel the heat of the pattern here. In the middle of it all, we have this UFO file release, which, although unprecedented, is very underwhelming also, but it's a signal, and part of it is war.gov/UFO. Remember that. You're getting war and UFO. It's 2 for 1. Kennedy was present at a surprise visit last year by ODNI personnel to a CIA facility where a team took control of classified documents about the assassinations and transferred them to National Archives, according to a Reuters report. She's part of the group that found those extra files that were missing, you say. Like Gabbard, Kennedy, before taking office, voiced strong views against U.S. military intervention overseas. Now, what we know about her is that she actually did remove herself, at least in part, over the Iran affair. And we're going to see more people doing that. We've already seen Kent do it. And now Tulsi, who we know on the inside was very much against the war, is also gone. That's a pretty significant core of the administration. And what you're left with are more of the neocon aspects, like the Rubio aspects, who want to turn this back into Bush-Cheney redux. That's why they have us bombing, over there in Iran, and they're starting to go back to that. They're like, well, we're going to go back to the bombing, and then, we're also on the way back, we're going to invade Cuba. So welcome to neocon America all of a sudden, when, of course, we had the administration going in there on a totally different note. But let's follow it on the JFK files and the UFO files side, just for the time being. A couple more quick things there. Another person familiar with her work said Kennedy is viewed within the administration as someone who's once a frequent outside critic of U.S. foreign policy, but has struggled to be effective in the competitive and often backbiting environment of the Trump administration. Amongst U.S. spy agencies, CIA Director John Ratcliffe and his team appear to have the most influence on Trump and his team. Now, this is very interesting and important. Ratcliffe is coming in completely from the outside on this. Trump put him in there at CIA, and this is the nature of the thing. Just like Jimmy Carter, when he gets rid of George Bush because George Bush won't give him the UFO files in 1977. Okay, this is a intergenerational problem, And he replaces George H.W. Bush, who will eventually become president, as CIA director, and replaces him with Stansfield Turner, who's a former admiral that Jimmy Carter went to college with. And he's like, you get in there, you clean up that CIA. He goes through 4 years. He can't do anything. He's a weird outsider. The CIA won't even talk to him, but he's the director technically. So you can drop people into these positions, but how far they get depends on the institutional resistance. You have to look at it in these ways. Now, the records are very interesting because back there in the heart of all this, as you're releasing UFO files, there's something I've pointed out before called the Blue UFO program that's in the Kennedy years. And part of the assassination piece is all about the Blue UFO program and the X-Protect group who've been operating for decades. And I want to say this, that one of the big mistakes that's going on in relation to a lot of these people who are former intel people saying they're whistleblowers and all the rest of it, they keep referring to the UFO program as the legacy program, as if, oh, all this bad stuff went on before, but all the good CIA people are in now. And that was just a legacy program. We're still working through that legacy program. Look, there's nothing has changed at CIA at all. There's been no prosecutions. There's been nothing. If anything, they've grown in power dramatically. And, when it comes to the Kennedy assassination, there was one CIA expert who was saying, oh, they're not in the business of assassinations. They are. That's what they do. In fact, they're the only branch of the United States government who, is associated with assassination. In fact, they're the best in the world, apparently, at assassination. And they've demonstrated that in different countries and, different things that have happened. So this idea that, they're not in the business of doing these things anymore is ridiculous. We have on record that they were setting up to assassinate Julian Assange. They actually had the agents on the ground to do it. We already have agents inside of Cuba right now sizing up the situation to figure out how we can flip Cuba and how many boots on the ground it's going to take. And that's a much bigger problem than they're portraying it as, too. They're just like, oh, hey, great. We get to roll in there and take over their sugar fields. It's a much bigger problem than that. Okay. In the middle of all this, the Golden Dome. Now, the White House just put this out, and they put it out on the same day as the UFO files, which I found very interesting. And it says Golden Dome for the White House. Now, I want to tell you something. I've been tracking the Golden Dome project since Trump announced it, and it's a boondoggle of a project. It started off the estimates between 270 and 300 billion. That was last September. And they've been planning about how to do it, but it is basically SDI Star Wars 2, the original Reagan program, which was to shoot down these ICBMs before they could reach, the American homeland and all the rest of it. They would shoot them from space. That's very important because a number of people on the inside have said it was going to serve a dual fashion of being a UFO grid and also have this ostensible purpose as a missile shield. As it turns out, we have these hypersonic missiles and all these other things now. So the Golden Dome has to be even better than ever. And so Reagan tried his best and put so much behind this, but Reagan was doing it, according to the Soviet premier Gorbachev, with the idea that we're going to be shooting down UFOs with it. And he wanted the Russians to be doing that with him. Now, that's 40 years ago. So what do we have now? Here's the situation. Trump, he actually went on the record and said, no, this is Star Wars 2. I'm not going to hide it. It's just that we have better technology. So, but remember what I said when it started, it was $270 to $300,000. Well, now it goes up and up and up. Trump's Golden Dome estimated to cost $1.2 billion with a T for Trump, far more than initially said. Yeah, it's about 4 or 5 times more. Now, that's very, very significant for a lot of reasons. But that's a gigantic investment in a UFO defense grid program. And the only reason there's any kind of support for something like that in Congress is because they know, and they're being told, that these releases are all in relation to this UFO threat. That's what they've been pushing on the CIA side, on the NGA side, on the NRO side. And they have these political people on the top doing it. Now, a lot of the people that they've used on the top, like Luna and Burchett, whatever, think that they're doing some kind of disclosure service, trying to get these files out. And that's fine. I mean, there could be a certain amount of naivete with them, but there are others who are just being told in the background, get on that UAP train, the cash, the gravy train is going to flow. Now, I want to go back to Gabbard for a minute. Here's a little bit of Gabbard's official resignation letter as DNI. And again, Gabbard is the transparency intelligence director. She's like, almost like a post-Watergate era type person. So she's supposed to come in there with a kind of zeal, with a kind of honesty, with a kind of transparency that would last a generation. And in her year and a half there, I think she got a lot done. But when it came to the Iran war, it just, it was a line that could not be broken. And the Trump administration apparently had been planning to oust her over the course of the past 2 months. And now here's the very interesting handshake going on in the back, where Gabbard also needs to get out of this situation because she's not going to go on as DNI supporting that war. Now, it's very interesting, too, because these news reports have just come out about the CIA tracking her down to her keyboard strokes. And this is all part of what's coming to the surface now, that they've been keeping a very close eye on her even before she was DNI. And we all know the stories about her being tracked by Homeland Security on planes and all the rest of it during the Biden administration, the number of things that were going on there. She was very much against the Ukraine war. Then she was very against any kind of Iranian action. And now she's been stuck in a situation where, as the DNI, she had to give all this intel. And here's what she has to say. The letter is to the president now. And she says, "Dear Mr. President, I'm deeply grateful for the trust you placed in me, the opportunity to lead the Office of Director of National Intelligence for the last year and a half. Unfortunately, I must submit my resignation effective June 30th, 2026. And she goes into a long thing about her husband, Abraham, battling an illness that she wants him to come back for, and wants to be there for him. And she says, while we've made significant progress at the ODNI, advancing unprecedented transparency and restoring integrity to the intelligence community, I recognize there's still important work to be done. I'm fully committed to ensuring a smooth and thorough transition over the coming weeks. You and your team experience no disruption in leadership or momentum." And on we go. So Fox is out. Fox Kennedy. Tulsi is out. Director Phelan is out. They're all out. That's a pretty big house cleaning. Now, before the Iran war, they also got rid of a dozen high generals in the military. The Hegseth maneuver, as it were, kind of similar to the Night of Long Knives, but a little more administrative. Got rid of anyone they thought might not be on board with any kind of Middle East bombing action. Before that took place, this is December, January, silently and quietly moving these guys out of position. So that amounts to a gigantic upheaval in the background. But there's also a UFO aspect to it, because you have the Golden Dome rolling in with a lot of war imagery. You have the 250th anniversary of the United States and the planned military parades and all this kind of thing. What we're getting is this message, along with war.gov/UFO. You're getting a whole piece, just like when they released the May 8th records, they also released the UFO file thing, and it said Victory Day, and they showed the World War II thing. So they've been associating the imagery with, America's victory. So now it's going to be victory over these UFOs, and the Golden Dome is the way to do it. But I'm going to show you the strange thing that's lurking in the background of all these UFO releases and how it relates to the missing scientists and the CIA's role in launching a false UFO threat for emergency powers. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series episode 226. It's the Missing Scientists Underground CIA UFO File Disclosure Trap. We're going to be taking your questions, I'll remind you, in the second half of tonight's program. You can ask them at any time, as Miss Olivia is going to be putting them together. So you can even ask them now if you want to, and we'll take them in the second half of the program. We're only going to go about an hour and a half with you or so tonight. And Miss Olivia, before
we shall see. Ray Nabosny says the LBJ called the CIA Murder Incorporated. And Happy Hermit 3D says CIA removing files from the DNI's office amounts to a palace coup. CIA is taking the mask off and going openly gangsta.
I think they had to make a really, they used an obscure rule, as I said. So they had to make a real serious move to grab those files because Gabbard had managed to get them. And Fox Kennedy, Amaryllis was right in the heart of it. Now, I'll tell you a story here about Amaryllis Fox, which is, she very early in life was used as a double agent in Africa and Asia by the Central Intelligence Agency. So she's had a long, serious history and she understands the agency quite well. When she married into Bobby's family, it's interesting. They had some kind of a meeting of the minds about, good intelligence practices and all the rest. And she actually managed RFK Jr.'s presidential campaign, if you remember.
Mm-hmm.
A very interesting lady. She's done all this, and she's in her early 40s now, I believe. And it's very interesting because John Warner, of course, our friend John Warner IV, is over there in DC working with these different think tanks around UFOs and things like that. And he tells me this story, and he says, well, I actually was with Amaryllis Fox and her husband last night. We all went out to dinner and all this, and she said, I became aware of you through the Dark Journalist show. She said, I watch, I've been watching the Dark Journalist show for years. Now, I want to say this to Amaryllis, which is, if you think there are things there on the side of the UFO file that you've learned that can be made public without, violating any security oaths or anything like that, you're welcome on this show to come on board anytime and speak your mind. But, that's great. It's great that you're watching the show. And I will say, it looks like with those various things and the various records that you were trying to get at, that you struck a real nerve. And I will say this about Amaryllis Fox, that it looks to me like she's getting out at just the right time, in a sense, because it looks like they're going not only for a war footing in relation to the UFO file, but the war in Iran aspect. They want to take it up another notch after really suffering publicly for it and everybody's gas going through the roof and all the rest of it. And it's really, poorly run situation on the PR side. Everyone's saying, oh, there must be some special reason for it. Well, that's not how wars work. Like you state the reasons that are on the surface and then you have your behind the scenes reasons, but the reasons on the surface keep shifting. So if nobody knows where you stand, it just looks like a big mess. And then when you try to put troops in the middle of that big mess, you've got big problems. When you destroy the economy that's blossoming with high gas prices, that's also a problem. So, and also when you bomb indiscriminately with, a major U.S. ally that is highly unpopular right now, it's just, those are all terrible moves. And so either there's a gigantic about face that needs to take place in that administration, or you're going to get more resignations like this, I believe. But I think the thing about Amaryllis Fox is that she knows a good deal about the UFO file. And I think that in her role there, operating as the understudy of Gabbard, we had all these moves for transparency around the UFO file, which, by the way, I was hearing the Trump administration was hitting huge resistance from the CIA and the DOD. And folks, it is the DOD, by the way. This thing about the Department of War is going to do this and all the rest of it. I have to constantly point this out. There is no Department of War, okay? Officially, by, legislative proclamation and the presidential and the process and the presidential signature, it was changed to the Department of Defense long time ago. The thing that they're doing now is what they call courtesy. That is, I can change my letterhead to anything I want to. So if you wanted to call it the Department of Krispy Kreme, you could call it the Department of Krispy Kreme. Doesn't mean anything. All bodies have to take part in that, all the legislative bodies. So both houses of Congress have to approve it, then the president signs it, and then you get on with it. So the Department of War, everything that they're doing is technically the name shifting. Again, whenever you see name shifting, watch out. And so it's not the Department of War. The official term, if you were to go sue, the Department of Defense, you'd sue the Department of Defense. There is no Department of War. It doesn't exist as an entity. It's a name that you put on top of your stationery, and that's it. but it has a bad connotation because it makes us look like we're interested in war. And this is the nature of the problem. And, somebody pointed out to me, they were like, well, in 1776, it was called the Department of War, and we had it until they changed it. Yeah, well, we changed it with both houses of Congress and the president. So until you change it back, you're not going to do it. Then it's not, it is not the Department of War. It's the Department of Defense. Okay. So that's a very important little psychological massage detail in there. Okay, what do you got?
Everybody's saying that they want a Department of Krispy Kreme.
Today, the Department of Krispy Kreme has ordered strikes into the heart of Ronald McDonald's backyard. The Colonel's fried chicken will be next if you don't meet our demands. So yeah, it's getting to be kind of a bad show. And a lot of that is Hegseth, who's also very cartoony. He could be very capable. This is the weird thing about him, but he's dressed up as a cartoon. So it's unfortunate. And if they continue on this road, then they're going to discredit all the progress that they made themselves, especially in the first year of this administration and then their previous administration. It's not, what they've done since the beginning of this year is against all the other moves that they've made. Their whole thing was against nation building. Their whole thing was against foreign wars. The kind of black hole money that the defense industries, well, they seem to have changed. As a matter of fact, Trump was even saying, well, I don't know if we would defend Taiwan. Even Jimmy Carter would defend Taiwan. Okay, so I don't know what kind of deals are going on, but this is getting strange. And there's a little bit of invasion of the body snatchers going on here. All right. Speaking of weirdnesses, a lot of things around the missing scientist story are very interesting because one of the key and funny parts of all this is in the middle of doing all these reports, the regular mainstream media has picked up on our work. So we have, CNN, AOL, Fox, and all these different people covering the dark journalist, reports on this. So I've done 9 reports on the missing scientists, and they've used it as a backdrop. When then they track back, they can see how the whole story started with these reports. Now, what's crucial to understand about that is that when they pick it up, on one hand, it's this kind of wildfire that's raging that they don't know how to put out. So they kind of have an organic thing that they need to deal with. So the first thing they need to do is get on board with it and figure out what's going on. So a lot of these different ones who, interviewed me or cited my work or showed my videos, like Rolling Stone, CNN, and all the rest, they were covering it and saying like around a dozen scientists have died or disappeared. What's going on? And CNN did a very thorough job, and I give them credit over there because even though they were kind of snarky about the whole thing, for CNN, this was remarkable. Now, right on top of that, though, there was a backlash going on, and it was Atlantic and all these other different publications, New Yorker. And it's very interesting because what they were doing was saying, oh, there's nothing to this missing scientist story. It's all conspiracy theory. How dare they even do this? Because it got all the way up to the White House, and the White House had a comment on it. And that really got under their skin. Now, it's very interesting because originally the White House and their response to it was, we're going to look into it. It's very important and all the rest of it. About a week and a half later, they were like, oh, we don't think it's related. We'll keep looking into it. But, and when I would contact different people and we would hear different things about like Monica Reyes's family saying they never heard from the FBI on this. Very bizarre, strange, outrageous, really, when you think about it. But let me put it to you this way. Scientists and missing generals and things of this nature constitute a national security crisis when they're missing. So because they are walking databases of information and, they know where the bodies are buried, they know the safe codes and all the rest of it. So the idea that you can have all these people just disappear and the government's not paying attention shows there's a big problem in relation to this. And I believe that the heart of the problem that we're dealing with the missing scientist story is the exotic technology in the UFO file. This is the crucial aspect. It can't be denied. Now, what happened, the shift in my, with me putting out the reports and the mainstream picking them up, there's a big wave, as I said, that went right up to the White House. But in the aftermath of that, it's quite interesting because the opposite has started to happen, which is now what's the Lou Elizondo counterintelligence wing has said, aha, we have to take this organic story. And the CIA looking at it and saying, we can't let this thing go any further. Let's put Lou out there. Let's put these different counterintelligence people out there, give it a different spin, put them on it, actually make them the targets. And then we can make the whole story about how they're under threat and they need to be before Congress presenting the CIA UFO threat. So this is exactly what's happened. And it's as ugly as that. I'm going to show you how this plays out. First of all, I started to become aware of it when there were all these AI things coming up about my reports. Whenever I was looking for the missing scientists, my own stuff was coming up. But in this one, it was quite interesting because I got a new hairdo, you could say. Because that, of course, is Nancy Grace. It's not me. Dead missing toll rises to 16. FBI probes space scientists. I was like, oh, I don't remember dyeing my hair blonde. But now, this video discusses reported cases of missing deceased scientists, including details about their research and the circumstances of their disappearance. Here's what was going on. Nancy Grace started to pick up on this, and she rifled through all these different things, kind of pulling things out of the air. And she's like, this is all about unidentified anomalous phenomena, as only she could do it. And they were getting a lot of facts wrong, but I was actually happy that she was putting out reports because I was like, great, everybody should get on board and push this thing out. And the clunkiness around the UFO file, all they have to do is get to the right people, have the right experts on and all the rest of it. Much to my chagrin, guess who they turn to? It's good old counter-intel CIA Lou. Oh, not only are the scientists missing, but they also have threatened me. I'm the one who's in the crossfire now. Yes, ma'am, that's true. It's me. So Lou, it's very interesting. He put himself in the center of this, and then every single missing scientist story I was looking at, suddenly it was good old James Clapper Lou who was in the heart of the whole thing. Now, Clapper remember, he set Lou out into the UFO field to disrupt the entire field as a counterintelligence agent. Lou even said, I'm not even into UFOs. I'm a counterintelligence guy. That's what I do. Fine. But you need to, you can't, if you play the role, you're going to get called out for it. This is the nature of the problem. So, what they did is they had him on News Nation, and he's sitting there talking about like, oh, I have 5 German Shepherds and machine guns, and I walk in a bulletproof vest because, dude, they're after me. And so this is how they took the case of, say, over a dozen major important scientists, and they weaseled it down to this CIA figure who was trying to launch a UFO threat for the James Clappers of the world. In the middle of all that, as I started off saying, they started to roll out the CIA people with this hybrid story. And the other CIA people that they got to do this, like Ramirez and others, were also contactees, supposedly. So what they were doing was they were basically taking the whole field up with their people. And this would be the thing. So you look at a news story and they're like, oh, well, this guy is CIA. I'll have him on the program, or I'll do this. And they were just moving these people into positions, but they were doing the same counterintelligence lies that we have heard for years. And then finally, you could say that I've been doing these reports for years on Elizondo and the CIA fraud and all the rest of it, especially around the threat program that they're engaging. A UFO threat is what they need. That's why you need the Golden Dome. You need the whole thing. And the CIA needs the UFO threat for emergency powers purposes. Well, part of this skulking around in the background is this Ramirez op. And the Ramirez op is getting higher and higher. Now, one of the things that Ramirez started doing was borrowing a line and borrowing research from our Joseph Farrell interview. And it was all about how the CIA was looking through genetic research groups like 23andMe and others for something that wasn't altogether human. Now, if you're any kind of a listener to this program, you've heard Farrell talk about that ad infinitum. Okay. He's gone deep into it. And he's also, we've done shows where we talked about how the original scanners that Homeland Security put in might be for this purpose of seeing, well, what else is out there and how can we track it on this type of basis. So this is Ramirez now. Former CIA officer says we're all aliens. Brought up the U.S. military hybrid breeding program. Former CIA officer John Ramirez went on record this week saying we are all aliens and that there is an alien-human hybrid breeding program. He said there are humans among us who might be more extraterrestrial than human. Oh, yes. Ramirez, that CIA paragon of honesty. Aliens will reveal themselves in 2027 with public being prepared, claims ex-CIA agent. Ramirez is really, he's swinging for the fences here. This week alone, Ramirez, Lou Elizondo, Congressman Burchett, and Matt Gaetz have all talked publicly about a hybrid breeding program. 4 separate people in the United States government on the record in the same week discussing alien-human hybridization. And this is interesting too, because one of the things I noted about the To the Stars Academy, and they're going to come into this as well, because Jim Semivan, 25-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency, with Tom DeLonge and Chris Mellon, the bank, as it were, the guy who controls all the whistleblowers, yes, of the Mellon banking family, they launched the To the Stars Academy, and they did that whole push, trying to make them the central outfit for UFO disclosure, whatever. It faltered dramatically. It still exists in some fashion, but the original push around it is quite interesting because General McCaslin was involved, and of course now he's missing. So my suggestion, when they said they're canceling the MK Ultra hearings, which they did, they were slated for May 13th, and they decided not to go through with them in Congress. That's Luna and all the rest of it. I sent a message over there and said, why don't you just do the missing scientist one while the trail is hot and bring in these people who had been talking to McCaslin about UFOs, get them on the record about what they were talking about and what his knowledge of UFOs were. So you see, if you really want to get to the bottom of things, then you're really shaking the tree. Well, one of the things the TTSA did in this period, and of course they were hooked up with Podesta, all these other forces. And one of the things they did is they put out a study, or they put these people in to study about Native American star mythology. And they had all these different things set up for it. So here in the heart of this is obviously part of the op that they're doing is, taking from the native traditions and trying to roll it in here to get past some of the religious sticky places that they'll get into with the Christian community. And, they're launching UFOs as demons. And I have a very interesting reverse meme for them on that, but I'm going to do this first. He said, some of us have an enhancement of that alien DNA. He also dropped that the Cherokee Nation links directly to Atlantis survivors. Wow. And that extraterrestrials see us as their children who are failing at stewards of this planet. That's right. We need to turn it over to the CIA to fix the whole thing. That's right. Just tell me where to sign up. That CIA is bringing you the disclosure. Oh, sweet. Here's a little bit more from Ramirez. We're kind of preparing the U.S. population, at least, and by the extension, the world population to that reality, that there's a presence here, that we need to explain this presence. Because if they show up and we continue to do what we did before in previous decades, there will be mass panic, Ramirez said. The reference to previous decades presumably refers to the policy of denial to cover up in surrounding events like Roswell. Quote, in many ways, I think the word got out within the government that they're showing up in 2027 and we better be prepared. I've heard 2027 is kind of an official capacity I can't reveal. I would say people in the government are aware of something, and there's limited time, a few more years to prepare the people. You'll die without the CIA. You need them now. Oh, it's the heart of John Ramirez. So this is the kind of weird note that they're coming out on. And then you're seeing these stories, alien genes found in human DNA. New study claims alien DNA inserted in our genome. Here's research and initial findings. And they quote, they have this story about 23andMe, and they quote Ramirez because he was doing all this thing. Now, you might remember an interesting little plagiarizer in the background there named Jason Giorgiani. You remember him? He's the guy who came out with all my hot zone research last year. And I had to blast widely that he was using my research and then legally caution him not to do it, because this wasn't a subtle mention or whatever. This was 3 hours of dark journalist presentation by some other guy. So we, whatever, Giorgiani, has done this thing before, and he's well known as that. For some reason, he doesn't want to talk about his own weird ideas about ruling Iran or whatever. So he comes out and he says 23andMe, like, the CIA studied 23andMe for alien DNA, and they do this whole big push around it. And it's interesting because it's a plagiarization of Giorgiani from Ramirez's plagiarization of Farrell in my interviews. So now the football is getting passed further and further down the line. And it won't be long before Jesse Michaels has the, hybrid special starring Peter Thiel. I'm not the Antichrist. So this is where things are going. So when I picked up this in the middle of the Missing Scientist thing, I was like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. Nancy Grace thinks Lou Elizondo wants to help. And in the middle of all of it, what's the most bizarre thing was crazy Carrie Cassidy, with all the different things that she's done over the years. She comes out and says, that Lou CIA guy, he's the greatest. Leave him alone. He's a champion of disclosure. So, you get to a point, you've just about seen everything. And this week was kind of like that. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 226, the Missing Scientists Underground, and no, CIA Lou ain't going to find them for us. And the UFO file disclosure, the CIA UFO file disclosure trap. Remember, the real UFO file? That's real. Human experiences, officials that are trying to move the stuff forward through the X-Share program and all the rest of it, and, running into incredible blocks in the deep state, versus the CIA circus, UFO threat, emergency powers grab. We're also going to give you a whole new definition of the human origin story, and you're going to pray that St. Lou baptizes you in the name of James Clapper. That's where they're going. We're going to be taking your questions, and I want to remind you too, if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch through the remarkable censorship that we see around the programs. And basically, it takes just a moment to sign up with your email address, and about once a week, we'll send you the programs that we have coming up for you. Incredible documentaries, docuseries, JFK and the UFO file, The Craze in the Hot Zone, which is the hacking Atlantis and everything that's going on there, and all the major things that we're doing with the episodes that are coming up, interviews that you will not believe coming up for you in June, later in June, and fantastic, mind-blowing episodes of the X series as well. It's all in there in the newsletter. Make sure you stand up and be counted. Get on that newsletter list. Get around the social media companies as much as possible. And I love social media. I'll do everything that I can with it. But I know, you see the various circuitry that they use with the algorithms. So the best way to get around it, that newsletter, 100%. Yes.
Tradviz says DJ should do a wig stream. And Joseph Earl says, what's your shade of lipstick, Daniel?
Exactly. Listen, that's what they're going to do. So it's funny because I had all the Google censorship going on, but now AI covers me extensively. But now the thing they're going to do is start putting Nancy Grace's picture. So, you can't win. All right. Aliens are demons. Did you know aliens are demons? Oh, wow. J.D. Vance says so. Luna says so. Aliens are demons, huh? J.D. Vance says aliens are demons. Details his obsession with UFOs. Well, I have a new reverse kind of programming to use on this. Are you ready? Every time they say UFOs are demons, say AI data centers are demonic. And so whenever they use it, we'll just use that as a counter. And I guarantee you, they'll shut up about aliens being demons. And in some cases, of course, of the data centers, they've named them, like after these various demonic entities. And Pazuzu and all the rest are out there.
Did they name one Pazuzu?
Well, there's a whole list. I'm not going to, I can quote you the whole thing. I didn't bring it up I didn't have the list with me, but there's a good 12 of them that just, have names that shine on to the demonic side. And you could use it. You could use anything. Look, to call aliens demonic is just as absurd, anything you can ascribe a demonic quality to. Now, are there things that might be, in interdimensional or from outer space that are demonic? Absolutely. But you can't take a technical thing in the government and say it's demonic. It's absolutely absurd, because, there's the pot calling the kettle black as well. They're like, we're bombing the hell out of the Middle East, but UFOs are demonic. So there's a weird thing there also, which is they know they're in a situation where they need to reveal aspects of the UFO file because we're into a period where people have become aware of it. They've done the kind of studies around it. And we've had generations and generations of people proving it. It's gone way, way beyond where it was. But remember, this has reenacted itself in the 50s, 60s, 70s. It's very interesting because Steven Spielberg, when he went on Stephen Colbert's farewell show, Farewell Colbert, that's a happy day indeed. But it's very interesting because I caught some of his quotes there, and I found them fascinating because if you really look at this guy, he's been around 50 years trying to push some aspect of disclosure. He might even think that, he's in on something and that he's doing the right thing, releasing this to humanity. They're putting out Disclosure Day on June 12th. Now, Disclosure Day is part of this whole ramp up. So all these things are coordinated. The government's going to put out all these UFO releases. The movies are going to come out. They're working up to this UFO threat, which is what the CIA has been working on for many decades. When they released the New York Times article in 2017, we said on the dark journalism side, we're going to track them doing this. And we've tracked the incredible ups and downs, and they've done all sorts of bobs and weaves. But here we are. And in some cases, they're still using the same personnel, like Lou, for example. Spielberg teases new alien film Disclosure Day is more truth than fiction. And he says, I really, truly believe this movie is going to answer questions. And the movie is also going to cause you to ask a lot of questions. All you need to get from the beginning to the end is a seatbelt, he teased, without elaborating on the plot. But one of the things that we learn there is that the aliens start speaking through people and all the rest. And, we'll watch the movie. He's, Spielberg has done some great films. There's no question about that. The problem is the timing on this, the coordination of Hollywood with Washington and all the rest of it, going for this one particular narrative, this one particular theme, and the threat aspect being really pulled up. And, we're supposed to establish it through the media and stuff that, aliens are there. And you noticed that after the New York Times article, if you go back in your memory about 2017, suddenly UFOs were everywhere. You could talk about it. You weren't made to feel anything bad about it. And they stopped saying, they don't exist. Stop saying that. That's conspiracy and all the rest of it. Once in a while, you still hear that brick wall. But Neil deGrasse Tyson, the ultimate paragon of UFO denial, now has put out a book, Take Us to Your Leader, or something like that, where he's like, now it's not so much about, are aliens real? It's, are we able to accept them? Well, it's a pretty big, quick flip of the switch there, Neil. You want to describe that one for us? So this is part of the reason why people don't trust institutions. You have a lot of Faucis, hidden Faucis in the background, and you have people who will flip on a dime depending on what the masters tell them. So the independence is lost in great measure over and over again. So how can you have any kind of reliable societal fabric operating in the background when you don't have the personnel holding this thing up in the background? So I do think that the timing of the movies signal kind of a huge shift going on. And there's another one coming out by the Top Gun Maverick guys who were here in Boston very recently shooting something else. And but Grush, the Air Force major who came out and said all these things about biologics and all the rest of it. And we had all these strange interactions with Grush. And unfortunately, I think the problem there with Grush being somebody who wanted to come out and tell us more about the UFO file, but under the influence, that overpowering influence of Lou and Mellon. But he is the chief consultant to that movie. And Elizondo was a consultant to Spielberg's movie and actually, flew from Wyoming to New Jersey to take part in that. And while all that was happening, those big, huge drone swarms were happening in New Jersey. Well, you think that's a coincidence? I don't think so. I want to point something else out to you, which is on this program, we talk a lot about the continuity of government program, COG, and the incredible lack of oversight involving this program, which gets us into all the underground bases across the United States, including the facilities that we know most about, Area 51 and all those types of things. I've pointed out that the actual geography, the X geography, is a little bit different. And I've pointed out places like Moon, Pennsylvania, for example. And I've done shows on it, so I won't reiterate too much of that here. But what I want to say in relation to this is, in a sense, in terms of those programs, we know the least about the continuity of government program. There was a point in time when, since the idea was, here's a different setup for the government in case there's a nuclear strike, on top, and we get into this whole, nuclear exchange, then we could be in a real, kind of situation where we need this other government operating from underground. The problem was, over and over again, that these people would come forward and say, well, we need more and more levels of secrecy and less oversight. And there came to be this split more and more and more. You can track it all the way from the Kennedy era, when he let the film director, John Frankenheimer, film a movie about a COG takeover called 7 Days in May, and actually lent out the White House for this purpose. So the people who have inherited that whole thing, and the whole idea now is you have to put yourself in the mindset as a general of how you're going to lead after a nuclear war, and you have to kind of repopulate the earth, and this is the nature of the design of the job, as it were. So the person in that job now, General Guillot, it's very interesting because he's somebody who is simultaneously the NORAD commander, the COG combatant commander, and the head of NORTHCOM. So he would be the immediate superior when they flick that switch, and he would appoint regional governors. The rest of the regular government would go away until the government could put this back. Now, the only reason you could activate the continuity of government program, and one of the only times it was activated in this country, was during the 9/11 emergency, which we still are living under. And every year the presidents sign on to that National Defense Authorization Act. One of the things that happened recently, which is that Trump decided that he was going to move Space Command and that infrastructure that we have for COG directly to Huntsville, Alabama. Well, there was a big back and forth about this. And in the Trump administration, part one, he pushed it, he made it, he was going to make it happen. Biden comes in and blocks it, keep it in Colorado. And then Trump makes another move to do it. And then Colorado sued over this whole thing about the administration wanting to move it to Alabama. Well, now Space Command is moving to Alabama and is already getting quite set up there. So that's a huge shift, not only for the space program and Space Command, but also for the continuity of government idea and for the aspirations of the people in that program. And Trump, looking at this, just like with the UFO file, he's somebody who has a lot of knowledge about these things. In fact, he was part of the original continuity of government program in the 1980s, because remember, there were always forces in industry that they would call in. Even Eisenhower called in the president of CBS at the time. So when we understand that continuity of government secrecy and what's involved and all the rest of it, we can see the stakes that are happening in relation to things like $2 trillion Golden Dome and things of this nature, or the UFO threat, or the CIA going over the top to push that so they can have some kind of emergency powers to do all these different things. So they've been setting up this idea for many years in the background. The first piece to really achieve it is a gigantic UFO Defense Office boondoggle. That's what's being planned for now. That's what we're seeing all these headlines and different things about. And that's where you get into the missing scientists, because I believe there's a group of scientists here that are involved that, let's say, didn't want to go along with the program, or in some way were in teams that threatened that structure. That's what we're going to get into next. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Great Grays says another scientist identified, Martin Aiden Schaefer, propulsion scientist working on free energy past 3626. DJ, do you have more insight on this one?
Yeah, actually, he's in the show tonight. He was he's an astrophysicist, and this is a person who was associated with a group that Amy Eskridge was associated with. And Amy is in tonight's episode as well. We've done a series of reports on Amy Eskridge, who founded the Institute for Exotic Science in Huntsville, Alabama, and warned us, as it were, that Huntsville is the biggest secret you've never heard of. Well, we did a big episode on all these things about Huntsville, and but the story about Aiden is very interesting. I think I might be able to jump to that here, or I might just save it. But basically, this was a guy who had been around these alternative propulsion groups, and he had been working with the same group that Amy Eskridge had worked in. But what happened to him was he was taken in by the police on another charge, and it had to do with entering a property illegally. And then what was learned about this was that they put him in an ICE facility while they were doing standard legal questioning of him, which is very odd. He should have just been questioned in the police station, given a lawyer, and all the rest of it. So they take him to this facility, and he dies of a heart attack. And that's March 6th. The timing is just too clear. It's too coincidental, as it were, given the fact that he, again, is somebody who is around these groups that are tracking with alternative propulsion. Now, there's going to be more details from law enforcement coming out about that, because people are doing requests and FOIAs. Now it's on the radar, as it were. And the information that I have on it, just from looking into his history, is he was saying that the Chinese were basically scanning his phones, scanning his laptops, and things of this nature. But I'm not sure if he was saying the Chinese as a kind of a code just for these aerospace groups. And he knew he was under surveillance, and he knew that, he feared for his life. I think more things are going to come out about him. But one of the things that I can say is, again, we have a Huntsville connection, because the group that he was working for was down there, and he dies in New Mexico. Again, this synchronous orbit of these people and these scientists over and over again, it's happening between Huntsville and New Mexico in a large majority of the cases. There are coastal cases, like the case of LAUREIRO here, which comes up again tonight as well. What else you got?
Scarlet Fire says data centers will be bringing the prisons to us instead of us being taken to the prisons.
Yes.
CryptoBit says smart tech means easier to control of us silly humans. And SB Hargan says, I'm telling you, they will centralize all commands under Space Force Command. That's why they moved them to Huntsville away from the others. GGGG says, is Huntsville the true Area 51?
Wow. Well, here's a weird prediction from a guy who spent a lot of time in Huntsville, and his name is Wernher von Braun. He wrote this in a book in 1949. Are you ready? And of course, you and the Ideas Room have heard this before, but it's important for everyone. Quote, the Martian government was directed by 10 men, the leader of whom was elected by universal suffrage for 5 years and entitled Elon. E-L-O-N. Remember, this is 1949, and this is Wernher von Braun talking, who becomes the father of our own rocket program and gets us to the moon, right? creates a secret space program. 2 houses of parliament enacted the laws to be administered by the Elon by his cabinet. Well, truth is stranger than fiction. Now we're living in Wernher von Braun's prediction. We know all the different stories we put forward about von Braun and his psychic ability and his mother's psychic ability. And one of the wonderful things that you learn when you do these things is these different stories and informations come up that just aren't in books anywhere. And one of those conversations was with Russell Targ, of course, who was one of the original people in SRI. And we've had a great communication over the years. I want to get him back on the show, actually. We've done a couple of great shows with him. One of the things he told me was that when he spent time with von Braun, he learned all these things. Like von Braun's mother was someone that all sorts of people in the German government would go to get different types of advice from. And that in her, kind of town that she lived in, everyone would go to her for advice about their love life or the weather or money, whatever it happened to be. So she was quite a mystic there. And von Braun must have inherited some of that. And what he asked Targ to do was literally build a psychic ESP machine to train the NASA astronauts, because he wanted the most psychic versions of these people to be able to do this. And what's funny is they're using this term out there now, psionic, a lot in the counterintelligence circles. And I just want to point this out for awareness sake, that what they talk about as psionic and all the rest, they're borrowing heavily from the different types of literature around UFO research. And that's kind of, again, more of the false op. So remember, you have real psychic people involved with the UFO file, and then you have this whistleblower thing riding on top, trying to gobble up different streams of UFO research from over the years. So suddenly, for those of us who are aware of this or been reading about it since we're 9 or 10 years old, not to project that on everybody, but it's certainly true in my case. But you'll be aware that what you see people from the intelligence agencies coming forward and saying, we're talking about hybrids, Look, I mean, there are hybrid aspects to all of the great abduction cases. There are some cases with Bud Hopkins where someone, had this relationship going on, being abducted over many, many years, and thought that they had as many as a dozen children with these Greys who were, definitely interested in the sexual reproductive aspects of human anatomy. So they're just regurgitating stuff that we already know about. And they're coming back at it and pretending it's a revelation. Like, hey, the CIA is giving you information, and you have all these things running around on X, and they're like, oh my God, so-and-so, the CIA agent just said there's human and alien hybrids. Oh my God, and I know very well, from when I was 19 with John Mack, right, who's the Harvard professor who talked all about these things, that the subject has already been way, way up here. Many, many people are very, very aware of this whole thing. And this idea of treating it like the CIA just ditched it out and it's coming, it's now, it's disclosure, that stuff's been around since, I think the hybrid story itself has been around since the 60s at least. And, when I think about, so John Mack died in 2005, and Mack and Bud Hopkins, they were doing a major run for at least a decade of these topics. And David Jacobs, who was a tenured professor at the University of Philadelphia, he did a whole thing about hybrids in the 1970s. He's still around. We've done a series of shows with him about, the Earth will be theirs. And his incredible book about hybrids. And he's told me all about these different experiences that people have had with hybrids. So hybrids are nothing new. The CIA is not giving you hybrids. This is not Trump disclosure, a hybrid. This is a joke. This is the CIA trying to throw as much spaghetti against the wall to figure out how they're going to congeal people into this threat mode where they can kind of reinvent, a kind of epistemology, as it were. So
so here's the question.
Yeah.
Okay, because this could go in two directions. Okay, so we've got these data centers that we know, we suspect, are being set up so that we would be tracked and traced. We'll have digital ID, et cetera, et cetera. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So
They're already doing that.
okay, right, but at a whole different scale.
Yeah, I'd say it's
Why
kind
do
of
we
like
need
the
so many of them?
final solution scale. Yeah.
So they ultimately, and then where all of our biometrics will be part of this. So
Yes.
they're going to know our DNA.
Yeah.
In theory, they'll know who's a hybrid and who isn't. So the question is, and I wonder whether the Disclosure movie will show us which way it's going to go. Are hybrids superior, or are they going to be shunned and put locked away somewhere? So this is, are you like, if they wanted to say you are a dissident and you are a hybrid and we're going to put you in an ICE center or Guantanamo or whatever.
Well, I can tell you what they're doing. They seem to be doing something that is the opposite.
Okay.
And the opposite thing that they're doing is they were saying, so Ramirez came out and his whole trip, and I will say this about Ramirez, he's saying things in 2023, in that pocket of time, which will become very used topics by other intelligence agents in 2025 and now 2026. So he's very involved in this. And what he has to say in 2023 is, oh yeah, the CIA was tracking families who had this DNA. Now, he's borrowing from people like Leonard Stringfield and early, John Keel and other people. So again, this is part of the vacuuming up, the hoovering, as it were. And I'm very familiar with hoovering because very often, TV producers and things like that used to call me up and they would get all these ideas about different things. I had all these horror stories about terrible versions that they did of ideas that I had, including the Tesla files, which when the History Channel put that whole thing out, I gave them the entire story. I have 6 weeks of emails to prove it. And because I had given them so much of a foundation about it and the John Trump Tesla connection and all the rest of it, I said, you're going to have to list me as a producer on it because I gave, basically you're building the whole thing off of the information I gave you. And they said, oh yeah, no problem. And then they just disappeared and they made the show and it was a terrible show. They had this guy, not to be critical, but he was just walking around. He looked unshaved half the time. I don't know where they got this guy. They just rolled him out of like B-roll and he was wandering around and he was like, wow, he's like, this is Tesla's original patent. Wow. And they ran this whole thing through and it went around and it went nowhere. And the basic thrust was, oh, he's hunting around. He's walking around looking for the Tesla files. So anyone who's seen that, I can tell you, like, that's one of my things about it. Cause I think about all those conversations I had with the people at History Channel who were doing setting up, producing this thing. And I'm like, oh, all they were doing basically was sucking all these ideas out of my work or in our conversations. So I got used to that. And then I wound up not dealing with those types of people, except in very select situations. So what you have to know, I guess, when you get around this stuff is, there's a lot of either marketing or intelligence stuff, and they're not very original thinkers. And I was thinking about the whole thing that, this is an incredible thing, but Gigi Young, an incredible guest on this program and the shows that she's done. When I see this 23andMe stuff and the whole thing about hybrids and them hunting us all down, I know Gigi's covered these things extensively in her occulted program as well. So there's a big vacuuming operation going on, and the really truly potent work, like we try to deliver on this program or with our guests like Gigi Young or Joseph Farrell, going into the deeper aspects, the deeper levels, they can only ape that type of stuff. They can only imitate it and all the rest of it. And so, a few weeks ago, I'd had it with the whole Jesse Michaels, Peter Thiel thing. And I'll just do this little diversion before we get back into the missing scientists. And I basically was just like, you basically, like, that's the last video where you're going to imitate stuff without being called out for it. And it's very interesting because he finally responded to me, and his whole thing was this whole checked out thing, like, oh, dude, I don't know what you're talking about, and all the rest of it. You can't gaslight somebody like me in relation to that. I don't know where they get this kind of thing, or this type of mentality. But there are thousands and thousands of people who subscribe to this show. There are millions of viewers. You're not going to be able to take wholesale ideas and lift them up and suck them into some Peter Thiel CIA project. It's not going to work. You know, I'll sit here with a bullhorn and make sure it doesn't. So save yourself the trouble. But I think it is important because it also gets to the ethics and the kind of, I think eschatology is the right word. It's the lineage of the thing and the idea and where it comes back to is very important, which is why when I do the work that I do, I always go directly to the sources. I always go to, on the mystery school side, you know, through Steiner's work, Ouspensky's work, Gurdjieff's work. I know where the sources are. And if you cite the sources, you're more powerful than if you pretend that you created, you know, can you imagine sitting somebody, you know, like a Weezer Peter Thiel program coming up and being like, how can we take this whole line of thought and reignite it as our own and pretend it's our own idea? So, but this is a big problem because you're in an entertainment space as well as a research space. And it has to be addressed, and people need to get on board with the idea that, oh no, you know, I realize this is the marketing side or this is the Peter Thiel corporate invasion side, and that's not the real thing. This is the potent work over here. This is the dark journalism. That's CIA claptrap, you know, and you can recognize it for what it is. And there's all kinds of good work. Don't get me wrong, tons of good work. And we exist in that world with the people who do good work. But I do think over and over again, they get drowned out by this kind of podcast hustle that goes on. And so you're getting a lot of ideas and things that we've put forward regurgitated in this sort of psycho intel babble, counterintelligence lingo. And that's why you get, you know, weird people on the scene. I don't mind saying John Ramirez is weird. You know, he's a weird CIA guy who's talking about weird stuff. And I think he's, you know, Lou Elizondo is really weird, very, very weird counterintelligence person. I don't think he gives a damn about the subject. I think he's on a mission. I think he's working. So we have to keep these things in mind as we do this. We're going to have a much better grasp on reality if we just deal with reality. And when you see these people on social media gobbling up, you know, the bad stuff, you know, eventually it's like, you know, they'll get sick. That's just the nature of the thing when you take bad information in, you know, you can't consume it. So you're going to get the wrong information. So the goal is you're going to have to go into a potent space to get the potent, real information. And if you do that, you're going to navigate through the junk that's on the marketing side and that's on the intel side. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. It's X Series 226. I have to do my best too. Missing Scientists, Underground CIA UFO File Disclosure Trap. The CIA trap versus the real UFO file. They're different, you see. We're going to be taking your questions here shortly. And I'm already running over for what I was going to do. But I wanted to take a walk through one of these lives, the last moments of the lives of one of these scientists who disappeared, a NASA engineer named Joshua LeBlanc. Before I do that, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
David Termina says, DJ, I did the deep dive on LAUREIRO and found many interesting things. One thing connects him to Amy Eskridge. They were both talking about the significance of the plasmoid instability, otherwise known as X points or magnetic reconnection. These X points have been shown to be a phenomenon that scientists have documented as a possible method of achieving not only high power plasma cannons, but near light speed spacecraft.
Wow. Oh, that's very interesting. I can see an overlap with the two of them. No question about it. The other thing is, we call it the X series for a reason. If you search in these programs, you're going to find the steganography for X is overwhelming when it comes to this. What else you got?
Okay. Following up, David says, I asked Blue Origin bigwig Tory Bruno, point blank on X, when are we getting plasmoid cannons and thrusters? He replied simply, soon.
Jeff Bezos will be dangerous with one of those. Very weird interview recently with Bezos saying he'd like to be a second SpaceX. And I think it's interesting how they did this because Blue Origin, Same type of setup, but they needed to use the Elon SpaceX program for part of what they were doing. There's another aspect here which gets us into the moon that I want to deal with, because when we talk about underground facilities here, what are the facilities now that have been created already on the moon? You see, because the traditional idea of how we've dealt with space and what we know of in terms of missions in space is limited. And therefore, the idea that we've been operating a secret space program is at the heart of so much of this work. So I'd say the three canons of secrecy going on in this government is the UFO file research, the secret space research, which piggybacks on that. Remember, you're building an infrastructure for something out there. And then the underground infrastructure, which set up the whole thing originally because they had that part first. And that's the whole piece around Eisenhower building the highway system in the 1950s. The reflector program, the covert program with the overt on top, digging out all this stuff. The underground program is you're making bases all across the country. So it's crucial, those things. I think groups like NORAD, the National Reconnaissance Office, they're coming more into the center right now. They're becoming more of the focal point. They've had incredible influence and power. And I think one of the things we're going to realize the era that we're in is that we're dealing with an aerospace oligarchy. There's no other way to put it. It relates directly to space, and it's the power of these defense contractors. They're interacting now, and they're moving. The whole goal has been to move these information centers and power everything from space. The original idea of the Nazi program, remember, was to have these rotating space stations controlling everything on the ground. So there's a core goal from that Marshall philosophy, you could say. It never really went away. And you could say there's a certain amount of persuasive logic to the idea that the further they've developed in secrecy, the more they feel will be unfettered by public oversight. You know, why wouldn't we adopt this kind of secrecy? So it takes a very aware public to shake them out of that and give us some of the transparency. And, you know, on a day when they released part 2 of the tranche of UFO files, you know, it's not a lot of transparency really for 80 years of hiding a program. It's almost nothing. It's following dots on a screen that could literally be sensor exercises with drones. So there's real UFO footage that is valuable, and they have it. Space Force has it, NASA has it, and all the rest of it. And you're not seeing it. And I'll tell you, the one guy, it was kind of like a Mighty Mouse moment, but it was Burchett, who often goes along, or, you know, he'll hear something in a skiff and then repeat it and say, like, there's 12-foot reptoid hanging out under a mountain. You know, and they've scared the death out of him in these various skiffs. But this congressman came forward today and he said, you know, this feels like a deep state release because I've seen more in the background of congressional hearings, you know, in private than they released today. So he knew basically that we were getting this sort of Stonewall thing today. What they're hoping to do, I think, is data mine enough of what's happening. And that's what we're seeing going on. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Scarmoge says the CERN collider cannot run without accompanying data centers. Could all these data centers be running, quote, virtual/parallel wired colliders? Just saying. I hear things.
Well, even on the record, okay, I agree. There's something going on there in relation to the particle colliders. But even on the record, they have the newest, the biggest, and the best, CERN 2. That is 5 times bigger than the original. And if you look at where it has to go, it's gigantic compared to what the old tunneling route used to be. So in terms of particle smashers, that's number 1 in the public realm. At least we can study that one. We know about that one. You know, one of the things I've pointed out about the difficulty of Antarctica study versus, say, a hot zone study is the hot zone is in a place which is a political hotbed. And the ruins of Atlantis that Casey claimed to write down there in that area between Bimini and Cuba. We know already factually that from people like Polina Zalitsky and others that this has been done, and they have researched it. And we've seen even the kind of metropolis that's under the water there. That portion of the activity in the hot zone we can get to, and we can actually do the research on. We can do expeditions. We can do everything, really. There are limitations in terms of governments. Don't tell me part of the rush from the Trump administration to grab Cuba is to have access to all those ruins, that entire track. That's one of the reasons that Russia has been pushing back on it for so long. But I think this has to be understood in this way, which is Antarctica is so important to all of this. And I think, the Antarctica setup that we have there has to be a way to break that as well. But the hot zone will probably come first because it is more accessible. It's easier to get at. And, thank God we have some people from Antarctica, like Eric Hecker, who was down there, who was actually on the spot watching what they were doing there with the ice cube neutrino and the whole, air traffic control for UFOs down there. This is very important testimony. So between that really kind of hot tropical thing and the icy underbelly of Antarctica, we're getting somewhere. We can get some real answers there. The thing is, the only reason I've ever pointed out the hot zone is more immediate than anything is because you can kind of get right at it right there. Yes. All right.
About the tranche? Are we going to the tranche now?
Yes.
BCT says, oh boy, more hazy photos. Rotten Cryptobit says Super 8 with lens cap on. And Hat Pauser says there's so much crap and disinfo on this topic, I had to come back here for the scoop.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you this. I'm just as curious as anybody, especially on this subject. And I will look at anything. I think that literally there's footage from a film crew in 1977 that wasn't part of today's release, but it's already available. Film crew shot it at a Australian airport. It's 1978, actually. And it's probably the best UFO steady image of a UFO that's ever been out. We've seen good photos, good videos, even though they're difficult to get, of these craft. The thing that we're picking up on with the drops from the Trump administration are these sensor videos. Most of that is either gun camera footage or sensor videos, which means you could be looking at stuff that is involved, as I said, in exercises. These could be sensor training exercises with drones, and or it could be UFO, kind of redeveloped craft that we've learned, we picked up a particular type of thing and we're testing it out. Unfortunately, these types of releases don't take us very far. I think they take us into they all look exactly the same, basically. They're traveling a line, it's odd, its trajectory is odd. But since we don't know what the government is capable of at this point, those could all be government videos. As a matter of fact, in my own mind, the only thing they would release would be government imitation UFOs. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of incredible. The era that we're in is very tricky because you have all the, what they call AI slop and the amount of, phony stuff that goes on. And then you have the government having this incredible, all the way back to Gordon Cooper. Remember Gordon Cooper talking about the footage he had of the UFO landing and, sitting there and then taking off and handing that over to a military official in 1959, never seeing it again. They're 60, 70, 80 years ahead of us. Okay. Maybe more. So, this is kind of like crumbs from the master ops table, right? This is what we're talking about. So we have to really think of it that way. Back to the scientists, just for a little segue here, and then we'll go to your questions. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 226. It's the Missing UFO File Scientists and the underground CIA disclosure trap, going deep, deep tonight into the heart of things. Some people may have thought by the title that I was going to go into the idea that the scientists who are missing aren't dead, but are simply whisked away underground. And, there's been a series of things over the years about things like Alternative 3, how the government would take these scientists and reassign them in kind of a witness protection type situation. I don't put anything past these types of people, but I feel that in the case of General McCasland and his assistant Monica Reza, who is a big-time NASA engineer with one of the biggest major impact patents of all time, the Mondaloy patent, and their assistant, Melissa Cassios. That's a team, and they had to get the team. They were operating Kirtland, Los Alamos, all happening there in that Albuquerque area. And that's the team, I believe, we know from the Podesta emails that McCasland was handling the Roswell craft. They were still doing the re-engineering. Stuff crashed in 47, and it gave us decades of redevelopment. And you can imagine how much we've taken from that development. So McCasland was in charge of that at Wright Patterson. So you have this ping-ponging situation with them disappearing under mysterious circumstances. Now, in their cases, no one ever found a body in relation to McCasland, in relation to Reza or Cassios. So I believe that team was grabbed and disappeared in such a way that they used the very best elimination teams to get rid of them. And we know in the case of Monica Reza, who disappeared in the Angeles forest in California outside of Los Angeles, that, she was there with a team going up a hill and coming down, and the team she was with is waving back and forth to her. She smiles, everything's hunky-dory, and they start rushing a little bit down this hill. They're still smiling and looking at each other. Then they look back and she's gone. They do find her beanie, very interestingly enough, when they send in all these dog teams and everything else afterwards. And her scent. Well, they call it a beanie. It's interesting.
And the last picture that she was shown in?
Well, I think it's a beanie technically, because that's how the reports go. But, in any case, but yes, something, a head accoutrement. And what happens is, what goes down is the dog's scent ends with the beanie. That's very odd. And what we could say there in relation to that is whoever grabbed her had to have the ability to either airlift her on the spot or take her in such a way that they knew they weren't going to leave any scent. The other thing that we learned when they were doing this disastrous mission in Iran last month, they dropped off this general down there and they sent him in these mountains looking for this uranium. It was a failed plot, and they never really came clean about what they were doing with it. Thank God we got that general back. But one thing they did release there is that they used this device called Murmur, which detects a heartbeat on the ground, so that they were able to scan the mountains and find this guy. So obviously they could have done that with McCasland. He was only missing an hour by the time the police got the call. So a workman had seen him sometime between 11 and 12, and he disappears at 12 noon. And some of the morning disappearances I also find interesting, like Joshua LeBlanc is also a morning disappearance, who then they're able to track his Tesla. I'm going to read his story here because I want to come back to LeBlanc as the NASA engineer who was behind a very secret program in the heart of NASA engineering here. So Joshua LeBlanc, and again, this is a Huntsville link, and you can see our latest episode we did, The Dark Side of Rocket City. That is Joshua LeBlanc, and his family reported him missing in the early morning. Again, we have a morning trail there, just like McCasland and just like Reza. Reza happens at 9:10 a.m. His Tesla was at the airport for 4 hours. So he drives to the Huntsville airport and just sits there, or the car sits there. He left behind, of course, like the others do, his phone, his smart devices, and all the rest. Wallet, you name it. Now, Congressman Burleson has been out there, Missouri congressman, and I think that it's a weird thing with Burleson because now I think he knows that he's getting snowed and his language is changing a little bit. So that's good. But he's been very interesting is that he's been right in the heart now. He's been like the front man, like Burchett and Luna for this. And there's another one named Moskowitz, who's a Democrat in Florida, who's a congressman who's always a go-to on the UFO side. And I keep wondering, how did they figure this out? But in any case, Burleson has started to say a few interesting things. And he says the family reports him missing in the early morning. His Tesla's at the airport for 4 hours, belongings inside. The Tesla then drives 2 hours into nowhere and crashes into a tree. Body is unrecognizable. America deserves to know what happened to Joshua. When that Tesla goes into the tree, it bursts into flames. And our friend in this fiery crash is unrecognizable because he's been burned to such a degree that he's unidentifiable. This is the project. There's a couple of shots of this. First of all, I'll describe it. The two projects that he was working on that I think could get him into a crossover with some of these other missing scientists and also the highly sensitive nature is this nuclear propulsion space piece. Second Alabama case tied to missing dead scientist. That is LeBlanc, who, when he disappeared and was later found dead, was only 29 years old. And that was last summer. This is somebody who had a long, long career ahead of him and was a young genius. He was brought into some of the most sensitive work materials at 21 years old. And he had a very nice, easygoing life there in Huntsville. And he definitely started to act strange. He was living, in fact, with his family. Now, LeBlanc died in a car crash when his Tesla Model 3 left Hill Road near Drummond Switch Cutoff Road, about 2 miles south of Empire in Walker County. Troopers said that the Tesla hit a guardrail and several trees and caught fire. LeBlanc was pronounced dead at the scene. Body was taken to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, where his identity was confirmed. Now, LeBlanc was a Louisiana native who had been reported missing by his family when he didn't arrive for work on Tuesday. His last communication with his family was at 4:32 a.m., roughly 10 hours before the crash. LeBlanc's car sat at the Huntsville International Airport for 4 hours, as I said. Very unusual. And that was early Tuesday morning before traveling west along rural back roads where the crash occurred. LeBlanc's phone, wallet, and dog were left at his apartment, the family said. So there's the pattern complete again. Put your mind back to the Jason Thomas case that we reported on about a month ago. Jason Thomas was an engineer who was working, a scientist who worked for Novartis. And you could say that if you wanted to do a kind of shorthand, that he was working on biological and cloning issues. And it's very interesting because in the period where he disappeared, there's a big meeting between Novartis and the Trump administration where the president of Novartis sits down with the president of the United States. In the middle of all this, Thomas, back in December, he has a kind of a very normal life there with a family and everything going on over in Wakefield, Massachusetts, which is maybe about a half hour from here, something like that. And lovely, like rural, suburban community. And he says, I'm going for a walk. Goes for a walk and he never comes back. He's found in March in the middle of a lake that's in Wakefield. And there's all kinds of strange questions about him being in that lake. In other words, how did he get to that point of the lake? If you walked directly into the water, it probably wouldn't take you to where he was, which brings to mind the idea that you'd have to get in a boat and then be dropped off in the middle of that lake.
What month did he go missing?
December. Very cold.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, freezing.
freezing. I mean, you wouldn't. First of all, who would drown themselves in a lake in December? It's just not how you would opt to end your life.
Excellent point. There's another thing there which is strange, which is that, like all the others, he was leaving his devices at home. Now, in some cases, they wipe the devices out. Here's one thing that he did. He says goodbye to his wife. He leaves everything at home, but he puts his smartwatch in the mailbox. Now, I think the protocol that's going on with some of these scientists who are missing goes something like this. When they get a certain type of alert, they have to, exclude their family from the communications on this. They have to leave their phones or any trackable devices, possibly wipe out anything to do with their phones, so that their location could be interpreted or assumed to be somewhere else. And they need to go off, they say, go walking west for a mile and we'll pick you up and give you a heads up on this emergency situation or on this breach of protocol, whatever it happens to be. And in his case, he walks off and there's no trail or track of him at all. But I think the smartwatch in the mailbox could have been a message to his wife, for example, because that's something she's going to know is a little bit unusual. And she's going to go for the mail the next day and she's going to see, his smartwatch isn't. So to me, there's overlaps in the disappearance codes of how these people are disappearing. McCasland, in his case, he leaves anything that's important behind, including his glasses. So, and although there's this thing about did he have his gun with him or not, he had so many guns there at his home in Albuquerque that his wife, when she's making the 911 call, she's like, I don't know what guns are there because there's so many. How do I know which one that he took? And he goes off on the trail and disappears. But remember, the wife leaves to go to a doctor's appointment at 11 a.m. He's still at home. A workman comes in at 11:20 a.m., sees him. He's still home. By the time the wife gets back at noon, he's gone. So in 40 minutes, that incredible turnabout of the situation takes place. And he's missing and never heard from or seen again. Nothing in relation to that. And they can't track it. Like they can't use that heartbeat murmur thing. And what's very interesting is what I heard is after a couple of days, and I've heard this from people who lived there. So I think the testimony's pretty solid. They say after a couple of days, the search activity ended. So did they already know what had taken place? I don't know what kind of national security protocol was going on there, but it's interesting to note the time period. Let's go through the timeline just for a moment. McCasland disappears on February 27th, 3 days after Trump announces, I'm putting out these UFO files coming up. Trump is prompted into that position by Obama going on a podcast and saying, there are aliens, but they're not at Area 51, something he had never spoken about. He had never said there were aliens. And he didn't do anything during his administration to move the ball down the field at all in relation to this publicly. So it was weird for him to say this. There were rumors floating around that Trump had a big speech ready for the anniversary of Roswell to give something out there to the public. So this jettisoned the process a little bit because Obama said it. Trump must have been thinking, I better get this out. The Democrats are jumping the gun on me. And he puts this information out. 3 days later, McCasland disappears. If you track back, Jason Thomas disappears in December. If you track further back, you're going to find both Monica Reza and Melissa Cassios disappear in June. The 3 people I mentioned there out of the 4 are the team. That was a team working on this advanced UFO file protocol. And they all disappear under bizarre circumstances. And I should say in the case of Cassios, that where she was working at Los Alamos, and this is where I got into it with the Atlantic people, because they said, well, she's just an administrative assistant. Look, check out her clearance, do some journalism, do some work. She had the high clearance for Los Alamos. She had the highest clearance. So that meant as an administrative assistant on that level, because of the people she was operating with, she had to have the highest clearance. They quoted a former FBI agent who said, you know, in relation to this, well, it was an administrative assistant, you know, big deal. That FBI person that they've been putting on these cases, Jennifer Coffindaffer, thought that Amy Eskridge was someone named Charles Eskridge, totally different age. And she said, this person, you know, died because they natural causes and I have the thing and all the rest of it. Charles Eskridge had nothing to do with anything. She just forgot to check the name out and really research the story. So she went into this whole thing and thought she was running around saying, hey, the Eskridge case is solved. It wasn't part of the missing scientist thing. Charles Eskridge died of natural causes. Well, Charles Eskridge has nothing to do with anything. I don't know what scientists she pulled out of her butt with that, but we were talking about a totally different person with totally different gender. So that's what you're getting with the FBI, you know, counterintelligence wing in the American media. They're not paying attention to the facts. These are the facts. Cassios, who they demean as an administrative assistant, she goes in to work with her husband, who also works in sensitive programs. And she shows her badge because you have to show the badge to get into the base. When she gets into the base, she leaves and she says, oh, I have something to do. They're sending me on, you know, some kind of a task. I'll be back with the car and all the rest of it, to her husband who's at the base. She leaves, and when she gets back and sees her daughter says, what are you doing home? And she says, I left my badge here. So she has to tell a white lie to smooth out whatever situation is going on. What happens in the case of Cassios? She cleans off her devices, complete, you know, wipe of her phones. She goes walking down. The last image of her is 3 miles from her home walking. She walked 3 miles. So the instruction is, leave your car, leave your devices, leave your family. Go walking up this street and probably we'll rendezvous and all the rest of it. That's the emergency protocol that's going on there. And you can see it over and over again in the case of McCaslin and all the rest of it. When you get to the LeBlanc case, it's quite fascinating because you're there in his Tesla. He's driving. He goes to Huntsville Airport and sits for 4 hours. Here's another version of this. Then he drives into some rural thing and off into the tree he goes. If I were to conjecture about what happened to LeBlanc, I would say whoever met up with him there at the airport basically is the same person who does him in and then sets the car off to go off into a fiery crash where even the body is unrecognizable. That is the experimental aircraft working with the nuclear propulsion that was set up by LeBlanc in his project. And it's very interesting to note that program is called Freedom, that LeBlanc was working with experimental engines from Rocketdyne. Rocketdyne was the same company that Monica Reza was working for. These are two high-level figures. And you might say, well, how does the elimination of one scientist sabotage the whole project? It turns out that in the case of Monica Reza, now what they're saying with her Mondeloy is that since the principals who created the patent for Mondeloy, which is that special nickel alloy, which I trace back to the Roswell case and the memory metal and all that, and that we're using in all these spacecraft for SpaceX and NASA and all the rest of it, they're saying, well, there might be a production problem because the originators of the patent are both dead now. Remember, the original partner that she had on it died of breast cancer in 2014, and Dallas Hardwick, and then Monica Reza disappears. So therefore, they're not sure the future of this patent that she put out there. And in fact, what we learn is that it's changed hands now 22 different times. This is a huge national security scandal. They know it. And I think the job on the media side is to tamp it down or get rid of it. And but it's a huge issue, and it goes right into the heart of our space research here. And I'll tell you, the more we bring the facts home on this show, the more we get this strange reaction from the mainstream media. And those facts, as I've said, as I've pointed out, of the importance of the missing scientist story, go right up to the White House. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. It's X Series 226, the missing scientists, underground CIA UFO file, and false disclosure trap. We are now going to take your questions, and I'll roll whatever else I have in here into the responses. Miss Olivia,
Okay.
you're up.
Tap. Was LeBlanc's body actually recovered, or is it gone too?
No, it just was burned beyond recognition, but somehow they're saying they were able to identify him. So there must have been some process. They don't identify what the process is in the articles that I've read, but they seem pretty sure that that's him who's in the Tesla. Yes.
Okay. Again, tap. Question: have we considered that some of the missing scientists were more or less willingly taken off world, underground, or off planet? I feel like they're read in and go semi-willingly to the ultimate project, probably working with alien colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, so you wander into areas of speculation there because we don't know. I think the more likely scenario, because of the types of cover-ups that are involved, is that the people were eliminated. So when I think of somebody like General McCaslin, for example, when I think of the case and all the details I've studied, I can tell you that I think that he's no longer among the living. I think he was eliminated. I think the team was eliminated because of their work on this highly sensitive UFO crash retrieval material. And I think it produced things, and she might have even put them in an accidental quandary, that is Monica Reza, by patenting. For all we know, they suggested it and then realized it was a bad idea. You have to understand, when she patented Mondaloy, if it comes from the Roswell memory metal, what happened in a period all the way back to the 1950s is that the Eisenhower administration, during the brief period when Nixon was in charge, when Ike had a heart attack, transferred a great deal of the power of research for the materials and all the rest of it to private industry, the material that we had around the UFO file, with the idea being that you couldn't track it into government if it was private and proprietary. But there was an understanding with the defense contractors until the understanding didn't hold anymore. So when you get into a situation where you have people who work for the government working on this material, on the actual proprietary corporate lines, it may be that it still resides in that shadowy corridor of the aerospace defense companies. So the way to get around that maybe was to say, what we'll do is we've reached a kind of a certain type of achievement with this memory metal. We're going to have her patent it, and then we'll move that patent through these different companies, and it'll still hide the origin of the fact that it came from the Roswell memory metal. That's one aspect I think that is very possible and likely. Is there a program to take scientists and bring them off world or bring them underground? I think there is a program to do that. But I think that in this case, what we're looking at is a series of individuals who got too close to something in the timing of these aspects of the UFO file coming forward. And you might even be looking, I have another case here where, again, she comes out of a Zen retreat center that she's been closely a part of. Monica Reza came out of a Yogananda center. You might be looking at a crisis of conscience in some of these scientists. And when they look and size those people up, they might say, oh, they're not going to hold, they might hold their oath, but they're not going to hold the secrecy in the right way around this. They need to be eliminated. They know too much, and they have too much of a conscience. I think when you look at those meditation centers and you see this incredible idealism around what Reza was doing, and you think about Yogananda, you might be looking at a crisis of conscience that was going on with some of these people. Maybe they figured out, oh, this is what they're going to use the UFO file for, basically, endless war. Maybe they were thinking in different directions. We have to be open to those types of possibilities because of the pattern and what set off the pattern. Remember, in the case of NUNO LAUREIRO, we know he was studying neutron star merges. Well, this is something we brought to the table. People weren't aware of this. But when we get into it and you look deeply at it, you realize it's about reproducing the process and the creation of a sun exploding. When you get to that level, you cross directly into that apotheum UFO file territory. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Yes.
Starwalker 19, does DJ think they do this as a conscious response or hypnotized or brain controlled from some other faction?
I think there is a protocol that is hypnotic. I've heard about these programs for years, and I don't see, they just have been improved upon. And the only thing that would happen there, there's no protocol in the government that says, oh, we need to stop using hypnosis or whatever. No, I think they just continually use the programs and they get better and better and better. It's funny, when I was talking earlier about the CIA, and somebody had brought up in an interview with Jim Semivan, they were obviously referring to my work, and they were saying, there's a lot of voices out there in the UFO field that say the CIA shouldn't be trusted. And this is the type of question that you wait for, because no one ever brings this up. Of course, you wouldn't trust counterintelligence CIA people to give you the truth. It wouldn't make sense, because they're the best liars on the planet, right? And Semivan, remember, 25-year member of the highest level of the directorate of the CIA, like top agent, top echelon. He said, oh no, they're confusing the CIA with the whole 1950s version of it, when we were put in positions because of the Cold War where we had to do things that weren't particularly ethical. No. They have propagated, remember in the 2000s, they got into Abu Ghraib and the torture scandals, and there was just a slap on the wrist. Nobody ever went to jail over those things. And so they've grown, they've propagated, they have their own Air Force with drones and everything else. So the Central Intelligence Agency has grown as an institution, as a force, as a power, and it has invaded and has become the foundational aspect of other groups like the NGA and the NRO and stuff. They've honeycombed their own people in there. As a matter of fact, there was a contractor from the NGA that I spoke to who told me that all the trainings were done by the CIA. So here's the thing that I think I can bring that whole question around to, though, with this, which is what you have to really devise and understand is that when you get into a situation where the CIA holds that much ability, and you look into our own history, you'll find that in 1960, we created the National Reconnaissance Office. So the National Reconnaissance Office, there were so many excuses, not to mention what it really did, right? And what it was doing was tracking satellites, doing all this, incredible surveillance on the ground. And the idea was it's the ultimate Cold War tool to guarantee America's safety with all these satellites that are up there. Now, the public doesn't find out about it till 1993. So 30 years in the dark. So the question that I have, and what has to be answered, and what I think we can put forward here, what is the division inside the government that's minding the UFO file now? And they're doing it. The office already exists, and we'll find out about it 30 years from now, except we can't wait. And this is the nature of the situation that we're in. Yes.
CC Sunglasses at Night. Is a foreign government taking these teams?
Yeah, no, I think it has to be looked at. As a matter of fact, when someone mentioned this character earlier, one of the things that he pointed out, Aidan Schaefer, he mentioned that he knew that the CCP was inside of his devices, tracking his work, because he was into all this alternative propulsion and anti-gravity projects the same way that Amy Eskridge was. And I don't doubt that at all, as a matter of fact. Matter of fact, it was kind of horrifying when Trump went over to China and started talking about the free hand that they could have with Taiwan. It's bizarre. Here's like Mr. Anti-China and all that stuff. And he's kissing up saying that, Xi is the greatest guy in the world and all the rest. And I understood part of that was right after the love fest of Putin going to visit Xi and all that. So maybe that was part of this. But it was very strange. No American president has ever done that. They've never signaled a weakness in relation to Taiwan. And they all have gone along with, as Nixon did in the beginning, the idea that Taiwan is still part of the mainland, but they recognize and send arms to Taiwan to defend itself as an independent, body there. And Trump saying, well, I'm taking a look at the arms that we're sending to Taiwan. We're going to consider it or whatever. It's a really, I mean, it's such a disloyal, weird thing to do, which is why I'm thinking about the whole switch in Trump in relation to this. How do you explain that one? And there's no 3D, 4D chess to that. So I think the Taiwan question is very important, and I'd like to see bigger answers out of this administration. You're not going to hand over Taiwan to China under some, huge data center AI transhumanist merger of some sort. I mean, something weird is going on, and we're not aware of it. So I'll go back to this idea that there's a division that's already in charge of the UFO file. And there's a group, there's a name to the group. Now, the program is blue. I've put it out there as clearly as I could in 2023. A year later, the government responded to it and said, yeah, we do have a program called Blue, because it really got around. And they said, but, it was called Kona Blue, and it was a crash retrieval program, but it never found anything, so it doesn't matter. Blue is that program. If you get to Blue, it'll be worth 100 of these, Department of War UFO releases. UFOwar.gov, yeah. So, Blue, okay? And the blue is all in caps. That's another interesting thing about it. And it comes directly out of the preceding era into the Kennedy administration, and it has a huge blow up with the Blue Gemini program, which in the record books, and this will help you to find out where the missing agencies are. In the record books, there's no, in NASA's own history, there's no known antecedent for Blue Gemini, and there's no known record of who approved it. And it's quite interesting because even in early works of Howard Bloom and people like that, who were just gadflies jumping in, these journalists checking out the UFO file, they were talking in the 90s about how Blue Gemini was about tracking UFOs. And people like Colonel Corso and stuff gave us the heads up that the X-15 was about chasing UFOs. So we've been doing this program for a long, long time. And they've had gun camera footage of UFOs, since the 1940s. So we're very far behind, and we need to catch up. Yes. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, X Series 226. We're taking your questions here on this exciting report tonight, and an exciting day, where they released at least something that was like UFO disclosure videos. And, I guess you could say something's better than nothing. We're taking your questions, and we'll go for about another 15 minutes here with you. Yes.
Okay, SB Harkin. Blue Halo and the company that acquired it are direct competitors of Anduril and Palantir in counter-drone Golden Dome contracts, and MCCASLAND was an advisor at Blue Halo.
Yeah, we put him on the record at Blue Halo, and we found out that he was basically, in retirement. He was their main consultant. So he had gone from Wright, Patterson, and Kirtland, and all these secret UFO projects that he'd been doing. And they try to loop him in on the CIA side for their phony op. Semivan and Mellon and DeLong failed because the WikiLeaks emails got dropped. He backed off, even though First, according to DeLong in that statement, DeLong says, you know what? He helped me set up my whole team. Well, he was working with them a lot then. So he was deeply involved in the UFO file. Retires, then he becomes the analyst and the consultant for Blue Halo, obviously for the incredible things that they can do. And what does Blue Halo come out and say? Well, not only are we a big cheese in relation to the Golden Dome, but we think that the Golden Dome should be used for more than just missile defense. We think it should be used as a complete domain dominator. And clearly they're saying, there are UFOs out there. We want to build the UFO defense grid. We just had the highest guy from Wright Patterson come over here and consult us for 5 years. And, you know, it's very interesting to note that something is happening where the blue is being taken out of the Halo name. Now, is that the result of this show? Is that just a weird corporate coincidence? I think it's weird. I think it's weird that since McCaslin disappeared, they're taking the blue out of Blue Halo. And now it's going to be like Archon Halo or something like that. Everyone, I want to remind you also, if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, and it keeps us in touch through all the static and all the noise that we see along the censorship line, and would let you know about the exciting shows and interviews we have coming up for you. Gigi Young is in the queue. We're getting Gigi back on shortly. This is going to be explosive. Have you been watching Gigi's work lately? This is going to be amazing. We just did Dr. Farrell on Huntsville. Incredible episode. And we have all kinds of exciting interviews coming up for you. X-Series episodes, and we're shooting new docuseries episodes with the whole production team and all the rest of it. So you can't beat it. Make sure you're on that newsletter list. Stand up and be counted. Yeah, what do you got?
McHatton. And who was DeLong in contact with about McCaslin? John Podesta.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. Look, Podesta, you can find Podesta now in the first Clinton administration. Now, we know all the weird things about Podesta. There's Crowley stuff there. There's weird stuff with his brother and, you know, all the rest of it. And what is that thing about Podesta being the father of, was it the Stone Temple Pilots guy? Somebody knows that. What is out there? There's a really weird piece about Podesta being the father of this alternative rock singer. But
Chester Bennington.
That's it. And I have to say, the guy looks exactly like Podesta. My God. And I don't doubt it for a minute, because there's so much crossover going on. And it's very funny because before we started tonight, you were talking about John Denver and all this stuff about John Denver. And there's this fascinating line that he makes about, you know, there's a spaceship over the mountain and all this stuff in his 1970s recordings. Well, it's really weird because he was the child of Lockheed Martin parents. And somebody sent me something about John Denver, which I'm checking out. But if it's true, and I'm going to put it into one of our shows coming up, but it's going to be really interesting because he was kind of like the Disclosure Fogey. That might be the name of the show, Disclosure Fogey. But yes, John Denver, there's more to learn.
I knew the Muppets were going to come in someday. I can't wait. Okay, Twilight Mist. We know cloning tech is a thing they can use. What if they were taken out of their current form so that one, quote, dies publicly, but they just continue on in a clone, or vice versa?
Yeah, well, I think that they're very far along, and that's why you're hearing things about human hybrid stuff, because I don't think, by the way, if we had a genuine human alien hybrid in government hands, they would ever see the light of day in public, ever. The government is not interested in handing out that type of information. And even, you know, at the point where they obtain an entire world government, you're still going to have divisions and stuff. And one group is always going to consider it an absolute innovation if they have the human hybrid with an alien. So they're not going to roll that stuff out publicly at all. What they can do is they can monkey around, as they have been. We've seen, you know, the whole How long has the mouse in the ear thing been going on? Like that, the type of experimentation that goes on behind closed doors in these scientific circles, is completely off the charts. And I have no doubt that after Elon is done trying to pitch robots for everybody and saying, you need a robot, that they're going to integrate human aspects into those robots. And that's going to be kind of the final call. Then you're right at the Atlantis, Edgar Casey automaton phase. And the Two-Eye Stone disaster can't be far behind, right? So we need to watch all that. We also need to watch the language around people like Musk who are saying that the potential for Neuralink has Christ-like possibilities. This is a real quote. And it's very interesting to me that you don't see the religious end going off the deep end and saying, how dare you use that, They're being instructed because Elon's still signing conservative checks on the Republican side. If he flips to Democrat, which he might, because I don't think he has any core political beliefs, then I think you'll see something where you will see religious groups attack him for this type of language. But Neuralink is a real trap, and it's a soul trap, and it's an eighth sphere trap if you follow the works of Rudolf Steiner. There's no question about what he was describing there 100 years ago and what you're seeing proposed in a technology product like Neuralink. And, he presented it, and he still presents it as like, well, it'll give the ability for people who've had these incredible disabilities to get sight back or be able to, command things with their minds if their bodies are paralyzed and all the rest of it. Medical innovation along those lines would be laudable, and in the hands of, ethical medical personnel, that's a totally different situation. What he said when he started off with this was, we're going to do it. It has its medical purposes. Then he finally let it out last year. He said, well, there are people who've signed up now for this whole thing called telepathy, which is inserting the Neuralink chip in, and they're totally healthy people, and 10,000 of them have signed up to have that chip put in at a certain point. So he just wants to market it that you're in the internet all the time by putting the chip in your brain. And the problem is, if you know anything about the esoteric outline of things, then you know that what's called the silver cord in the brain is the pituitary pineal and their connection to the Leydig cells that comes out of the Casey work, Steiner's work, theosophy, you name it. And that is the seat of your soul. So you don't want to share it with a, technological chip. That is literally, where you get into this whole beast situation warned about by the prophet at Patmos. So that is where you really draw the line, the red line in the sand at Neuralink. But they will do this. They will move forward with it. They already have programs for it, and they've already outlined, the robots that'll make you do it. So there are big, big problems on the horizon with the overwhelming ride on the technology side without the ethical backbone to push up against it. And I think what you're going to be starting to see is it's going to be obvious who are the cowards in the public sphere in relation to this and who is calling out the power on it. I think there are some very, very good people who have observed this and said, you only have a certain amount of a window of time to fix that situation. And when they say it in relation to AI and things like that, I know that they've gamed out AI, and I take all their hand wringing. They know everything that will happen with AI, and what they'll do maybe with AI is create a gigantic cyber crash where it just gets into everybody's information and sucks up all their money, and they'll be like, we need to go to a new monetary system. This is how they can use the AI stuff. But I know for a fact that they've been working with AI. I mean, if you just look at the papers that were around in the late 1960s, they're already quite aware of its, potential dangers and things like that. So the idea that they would just roll it out and then do some hand wringing, like, oh, we didn't know it wanted to get into our nuclear devices, it just seems to me that AI in some way is going to be the ultimate excuse, for all kinds of malfeasance. But we'll see. I would say this, that I presume gigantic pushback is in the air. And what's interesting is that the UFO file revelations and the fact that it's in the sphere now, even if they are being so limited about it, it just opens up the idea that the government has lied for 8 decades about this. That can be used very, very well on the side of people looking for real transparency. Yes.
Tantrika, has anything new been revealed, Ari, High Jump, and Admiral Byrd?
Well, there's the majority of the high jump files are still classified. You could have a complete drive for those files to come out the way that we did with the JFK files, things of that nature. And like I said, they're still stealing files from Gabbard's office. No, I think the really important things that happen with high jump, talk about strange missing or dead cases. How about the son of Admiral Byrd, as we put in our documentary, JFK and the UFO file, where the son, remember, participated in high jump. He was a 22-year-old naval guy, and he goes with his dad to Antarctica, and they're attacked by something. Is it a UFO attack? It sounds like it. And but it's a fact that incredible armada of force and research and everything else that goes down there turns around in a very short period of time when it was supposed to be there for a prolonged period. So we know that something really certainly went wrong. And it's very interesting because his son, he lived at Beacon Hill here in Boston. And he decides at a certain point in the late 1980s, I'm finally going to give a speech about high jump. And he is invited down to DC to do this. He gets on a train and disappears. Nobody can find him. What happened to Admiral Byrd's son? Well, he turns up a month later, dead of malnutrition, dehydration, in a warehouse, in clothes that he didn't go down there with. And he has a kind of weird soot on him. And it's very interesting because there's a guy there, sort of a watchman of these various warehouses, place in Baltimore where this all happened. And he said, well, I did see him. And when he saw him was about 3 days after he went missing. And he said he was walking along with another man, and he asked for directions downtown. And I noticed from his speech that he was a very articulate, well-educated guy. And I wondered why he was with this other kind of homeless person and why his own clothing seemed disheveled and he had one shoe on. So something had taken place there between him heading in the train to DC and getting off in Baltimore, walking around with this strange person, and then ending up dead in a warehouse. So the secrets of high jump, I think, remain the secrets of high jump. We know very little about it. And I think the activities of Lloyd Berkner, and after all, Berkner went down to Antarctica with Admiral Byrd all the way back in 1928, set up Little America, the radio station, and all the rest of it, and then becomes the person who sets up the International Geophysical Year in 1958. That whole wave, and of course, Berkner's the person that JFK is going to see when he gets assassinated. They're supposed to meet at the Trade Mart. There's this gigantic ceremony and speech that's planned for. That's all in the documentary, but Berkner's in charge of the Robertson Panel UFO file. So, there's something in its heart and essence of Antarctica that we just don't know about. But there's been an idea that it was a Nazi technology, like a Nazi base or something like that. And there's an idea that it's a UFO base. It's certainly something along that line. And I think the International Geophysical Year, where, after all, you had these supposed enemies, the Soviet Union and the United States, both taking part in it. And I believe there was a certain amount of UFO espionage that was taking place there. Yes.
SV Harkin, the MIT scientists researched plasma stability, especially the edge of plasmas, which also relate to 6G technologies. And another George says President Trump said 6G will let them see deeper into our skin.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I mean, all kinds of things. I'm sure what they tell Trump, he's just like, wow, that's new technology we can use. And I don't think that he gets the potential perils. And I'm somebody who has said in the past with Trump that, he stood up against a lot of attacks from the deep state. But what's happening with the administration is the deep state is getting more and more powerful inside the administration, and the administration is losing star players like Gabbard and Amaryllis Fox Kennedy. They may eventually lose RFK, and they're losing them over issues that are related to militarism, in my opinion, over the UFO file, but also totally unnecessary war in Iran. And it's like the Iraq war, except the problem is even Bush with the Iraq war, you had a phony reason of WMD, right? You had hearings before the UN. You convinced the Congress, both houses of Congress, to vote on it, vote it up or down. You won't even allow this thing to go to a vote, There was a War Powers Act vote where Congress was like, no, we don't want to interfere. But that's not the same thing as voting on the war. And so there's big problems with this. This is really, it's spilling out, and it could become an absolute unmitigated disaster, the activities in the Middle East and the attacks on Iran and all the rest of it. Incredibly reckless. And that's just where it's at. And you will lose more and more good people inside the administration over that fact, because this is the neocon playbook. But if they are able to get those voices out, then the Trump administration becomes something quite different. But I would say in terms of innovation and things of that nature, President Trump, with the Space Force, there's a demonstrated ability in there to try to use outside the box means to get control of things again. And the idea of pulling that whole technology wing back under the executive branch with the Space Force, and maybe even with these releases, I think he's looking now and saying the UFO file is in the hands of the X-Protect group. And what can he do to pull it back under his control? And I think what they're thinking inside the Trump administration is that if they promise them, that is the X-Protect group inside the intelligence aerospace defense contractor corridor, some kind of a militaristic interaction with the UFO file thing, the CIA UFO threat, that they'll get some kind of a say back in the UFO file. So this is a very strange, strange like you wouldn't believe, game going on in relation to the UFO file in the Trump administration.
I keep focusing on the scientists and how some are missing and some are dead.
Yeah.
And why are some dead and some missing? And was it...
What's your answer?
Well, I don't know. I'm just mulling something over. It's sort of, were they offered a deal? Well, the dead ones, you would assume, if things are run like the mafia, are a warning to the other scientists that when they're offered the deal, say yes, right? And whatever that deal is. And if you don't do it,
Let's go back in history to a scientist who was kind of potentially missing, could have potentially been dead on multiple occasions, with Thomas Townsend Brown. He's someone who is the interface character with the UFO file and all these advances. And I think this might answer your question. Let's see. So Brown, from my extensive conversations with his family, Brown is very, very interesting because he would do all these innovations and work on these black projects for the government, yes. But when he was using it in relation to the UFO file, and he felt maybe a pang of conscience or saw where they were going for it that was beyond the bounds of national defense, he would take off and go to Eleuthera Island. And according to his daughter, he would be surrounded by a security detail that was unbelievable. So he had hired his own security detail to make sure that the X-Protect group didn't assassinate him. And after things cooled off, or there was some communications back and forth, he had enough contacts, and they smoothed the situation out, he would go back and he would work for them on these various projects. Now, that's somebody who worked directly with public UFO groups, some of the biggest in the 1950s, who had people who were outspoken against the X-Protect group that they called the silence group back then. People like Donald Kehoe and others would call out the silence group that was making all the pilots shut up or controlling the whistleblowers, the same way you get the Chris Mellon type people doing that now. So in his case, he found a way to improvise. His way of improvising was, I'll work on them, I'll extend the experience that I have, but I'll also work publicly with an X-Share type group to try to get the information out without violating my national security oath and all the rest. Now remember, he goes all the way back to Cuba. Here's Cuba again. 1930, he's one of the creators of the Byfield-Brown effect, which gets us into all sorts of deep exotic technology back then. And the Navy sends him in and says, you know what? We want you to do this special mission for us, testing a submersible off the west coast of Cuba. They send him in on the secret mission. And when he goes there, the first day he's there, Cuba has its biggest earthquake. Incredible earthquake. And he's there for it. That's just when he gets there. And part of that mission is to go on the yacht called the Caroline and to meet this billionaire and to have this kind of interaction. He's sending these messages back and forth about the project, how they're going to help him off of this yacht, do the submersible and all the rest. And that billionaire shows him a copy of the Alice in Wonderland original edition, and it's in this wonderful glass container. And he asks the billionaire, what is it are you doing with it in the glass container? Is that just for protection? And he says, if the yacht goes down, the edition lives on. It outlives us all. So the incredible, Rosicrucian magic associated with the original Alice in Wonderland book, for this guy, he's holding in his hand. This is the interface between magic and technology that our friend T.T. Brown walks into. So from the start, he's walking that very fine line. I think a lot of these scientists get themselves into that world, and you are walking a tightrope between magic and science. So, I think his story is a very big tell. We've pointed out the work of Mark McCandlish, and I just want to say this about McCandlish because his case was a huge cover-up, in my opinion, and he died under very similar circumstances to Amy Eskridge. They said he took his own life and all the rest of it, but the people around him didn't agree with that. One of the things that he was convinced of is that we had this anti-gravity craft and we had redeveloped the saucers on a much higher level. And with his marvelous drawings of the various craft, the alien reproduction vehicles and the things that he had seen and that other whistleblowers who were close to him had told him about, he had put a number of these things on the record. And he's the first one in this wave, in this pattern, to go, because what happens is he dies under these suspicious circumstances. And Amy Eskridge, in her final interviews, is very disturbed, talks very openly about the death of McCandlish being a hit. And she said the mistake that he made was to not say it publicly, that they're after me. I'm not making that mistake. I'm telling you that they're after me. And so that didn't save her in this case, unfortunately. But there's your link to what was going on in these programs, what he was seeing, and what she knew existed in these programs. That's getting deep to the UFO file. That's why these people were eliminated. And so if we can get that truth out there, it doesn't matter if, Nancy Guthrie, I'm not Nancy Guthrie, Nancy Grace. Nancy Guthrie is another missing person. But, if Nancy Grace is doing these wild episodes about it, as long as she gets it out there, then that's all that counts. I wanted to read you a couple of interesting text quotes that she made before she died away, which before she, was found dead. And so she's having these interactions. And of course, there's a British intelligence officer named Frank Milburn that she talks to at the end of her life looking for security. She's thinking maybe this guy can provide like a security detail for me, a la Thomas Townsend Brown. And but these texts are with a friend that she's talking. And she says, I've been working on some tech proposals for the Department of Homeland Security for biothreat with this whole Russia thing. Forgot about Miguel while I was tied up with that. Someone has been burning me to a crisp while I've been working on the Department of Homeland Security stuff. So now I'm not so sure if it's the best time to stick my neck out on TV. It's complicated. This is close to her death. Some kind of new DEW I have not seen before, directed energy weapon. And the person she's talking to is saying, okay, I'll talk to you. And basically what she reveals in there and says in her final, it's not really an interview because it was never meant to be publicly released. It was more like a Zoom session. But she starts talking about Lou Elizondo. And she says, well, Lou Elizondo approached me. And, what Lou did was he said, I think that you can make a fortune from the government with this research because they won't want China to get it. And he was playing all these kind of intel games, trying to fill her head. And what we have to know about Amy is that her dad was working in secret projects for NASA engineer, high-end aerospace engineer. And probably what's going on here is they're after the work that she's doing and they're after the dad's work for the CIA counterintelligence program running this UFO threat organization. And they send Lou in as the bait. So now Lou does that. And what she says is very interesting because she says, no, Lou and all the rest of it, I'm not dealing with it. I'm bringing in another person to all this. I'm going to bring in a person I know from the Army. And as a result of that, she says, Lou cut off all communication. And then she comes forward and says in the interview, Lou is evil. Later on, the person that they're rolling out in all these interviews for the missing scientists with, Nancy Grace and all the rest of it is the person that Amy Eskridge called evil. So I wrote a big thing on Twitter X about it, and I flagged all those different people that were using Lou as a spokesman for the missing scientist thing. And I said, did you know one of those people that are missing, or one of the people that ended up dead in the missing scientist or dead scientist flap called Lou evil? Do you think you should be having him on as the guest talking about this? And this is the nature of the situation. When you dig in just a little bit, you start to see the nature of the problem that we're having here. The counterintelligence wing who are invading this stuff and causing these hazards for these people is the same thing that are trying to take advantage of the fact of the public interest in their deaths. That's a big problem. And it's only a real independent media that can solve that. Yes, Miss Olivia.
I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to why some are missing, and why some are dead. And
yes, I like that.
Do you think that clearly there's a program, whether we call it the breakaway civilization or, it could even, is it run sort of like Hollywood where there's an occult hierarchy? At some point, you're going along with the program as a scientist, and then there's some initiation. There's something that you find out that you don't want to play that game anymore. You can't, you basically, you've topped off at the level. You're not going to cede to their demands. You can't go along with the program. You have too many morals. It goes against your ethics, right?
Yes.
Those people are going to be eliminated. You would think, like, this is what I'm working on. And some people, you know, this goes along with they're working underground, they're working in a facility that maybe they need to be taken out of their surroundings, away from their family, and maybe it's part of an initiation. I don't know. I'm working this. I'm also sharing this with the audience so they can share their thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's very interesting to think about how these people would be approached, on what level that they are. I think my own kind of deduction around the whole thing is that they've estimated through psychological profiling and other things that the program that they want to do, the they here again becomes the X-Protect group, that they can't do it with these people and these teams that know certain types of things. So therefore, I think that you're looking, in the case of these people, are people who weren't going along with the program, or who, because of the plans that were being worked on that got changed, they're no longer, if you knew somebody like McCasland, who DeLong was telling Podesta was in charge of all of these different programs and was like, the main guy in the UFO file, his elimination then becomes, the fact of the case of him missing under these strange circumstances where nobody can even track him. They can't say, well, he was walking along this thing and he left his phone here. We have this footprint of him or whatever. Nothing. It shows us that on that level, it is definitely a national security crisis. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. I do think that we've gone very deep on this tonight. We'll take a couple more questions and wrap it up. And I also think that there's a couple of things just to round out in terms of the points that we made tonight. One thing I'd like to say is that, we're probably looking at a situation in a case with the missing scientists where there's going to be kind of a false version of looking into it going on with the mainstream media to kind of control the organic nature of the whole thing. But it's very important on the independent side to make the investigation potent, to bring forward the essential facts, and to not have CIA counterintelligence people leading the charge, because they're the same ones who got us into this false UFO threat posture and ufogov.war or war.gov/UFO. That's the thing to avoid. Remember, UFOs, the unidentified flying objects, the whole alien aspect is first a scientific study. There's no question about it. And the aspects of technology that are around it, of course, you would analyze for defense purposes and things, but you would not have that be the kind of center, the focus of what you were doing. And you would not have a gigantic defense office boondoggle driving that. That is completely artificial, and we can bring it around to a totally different place. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Give me a second, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, David Termina. DJ, according to the stated record, the biggest current obstacle to a successful fusion reactor is the chamber itself succumbing to an intense heat fatigue. If Monica Reyes's knowledge of exotic alloys was a possible solution to this problem, it could link her work with LAUREIRO's MIT fusion program.
Oh, there's no question. And if you think about it, what was it that Marcel was giving us, at its core? He was saying that memory metal, you couldn't do anything to it. And they went through and did all these experiments. They tried to burn it. They could not burn it. Well, if you couldn't burn it and you were later able to develop it into this nitinol patent, and then take that nitinol patent, redevelop it to a different nickel alloy, and create a heat-resistant metal, you're set. You don't need the Russians to take you into space anymore the way we were using them in the 2000s, which was pretty embarrassing considering John F. Kennedy said we'll be the first to go to the moon and space will become the new frontier. Well, I'll tell you, it's pretty interesting because we fell behind very dramatically, publicly, while all this advanced stuff was going on underneath. And if you think about it, remember some of the most honest people who came forward and told us about this, like Gordon Cooper, the astronaut. He told us as much as he could. If you can read between those lines, he was saying, look, there was a program to go to Mars in 1966. What happened to the Mars program? What was going on there? These are the questions that I will leave you with tonight. And Miss Olivia, your final 2 questions of the evening.
Okay.
Please.
Caritas Tarot, lest we forget, Jack Parsons was the OG, possibly murdered scientist / aerospace engineer.
Oh, yeah. He really is. And I think Parsons was eliminated. And what's weird is, I had this conversation with Farrell about it. And what he was saying was the people who were kind of controlling things didn't really have the occult beliefs, but they would take a true believer like Jack Parsons and use him to his ultimate point. So his, the true believer, even if he was off on his, tangent of Crowleyism and Thelema and all the rest, he's a true believer in what he's doing. Also a true genius as well, no question about it. But you could see those groups using him until he was not, usable anymore, or he knew too much, or, whatever it happened to be. And I also think it's interesting when you get around Howard Hughes, who he was contracting for at the end. You're basically dealing, the CIA becomes Howard Hughes. And once you launch Hughes Aerospace, you've got the X Protect in Space aspect, and you have Nixon helping Hughes Aerospace by letting them be Hughes Medical. And this is something that Bobby Kennedy was always incredibly, just thought it was this crude move and was something he wanted to expose, that Nixon gave them a medical tax-free, immunity and amnesty from any taxation, so they could develop Hughes Aerospace without any taxation involved at all. That's pretty remarkable. And he did it by basically setting it up as one of Hughes' medical charities. So there's so many points and spaces there when you go into it. You have to look at that whole thing this way. And Miss Olivia? So there's that light right there.
Oh,
and
okay.
we can wrap it up with that, and you can take your last question.
Okay. All right. This is the question of questions. Thomas Ball. Who are the overlords above our Swiss banker lords, and what planet did they come from, or what dimension did they come from?
I think we started with a question like that, and it's right on. I think it's a good, worthy exercise of a question. I think deep in the heart of this, a knowledge of mystery school work and how it overlaps with so much of this is quite interesting and very important, I would say, in the grand scheme of things. So if we understand what Steiner was trying to give us around the eighth sphere, or Armand's 21st century technology, the dark astral force coming through the technology and its space aspects and what that meant, then I think we start to get closer to the real thing. And here, I can give that to you. It's way up there.
Okay. All right. It's fine there.
I would say that you're getting closer to it. And what's fascinating is I have a quote here from Gurdjieff, and it's about, Gurdjieff at the end of his life wrote this incredible tome called Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. But being a true mystery school master, he was leaving it in the clues, you could say, of the entire thing. So I'm just going to read a couple of lines of what he had to say about what was going on in relation to, because what's happening is Beelzebub is coming back to visit the Earth after visiting it originally during the Atlantean period. And you get this in Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, which is a very strange book. And I will say this also, that Gurdjieff knew how to write in the most, kind of popular, widespread, accessible sense, as he did in Meetings with Remarkable Men, which is probably one of the most accessible books you could read, written in a biographical style. And he intentionally makes Beelzebub's Tales very difficult, but loaded with insight. To a certain planet of this solar system, namely the planet Earth, there was once sent a messenger from our endlessness, a certain Ishiata Shimash. And as Beelzebub had then fulfilled a certain need in connection with his mission, the said messenger, when he returned once more to the sun, earnestly besought his endlessness to pardon the once young and fiery but now aged Beelzebub. In view of the request and also of the modest and existence of Beelzebub himself, the maker-creator pardoned him and gave him permission to return to the place of his arising. That is why Beelzebub, after a long absence, happened now to be at the center of the universe. His influence and authority had not only declined during his exile, but on the contrary, they had greatly increased, since all those around him were clearly aware that thanks to his prolonged existence in the unusual conditions, his knowledge and experience must inevitably have been broadened and deepened. And so, when events of great importance occurred on one of the planets of our solar system, Patnet, Beelzebub's old friends had decided to intrude upon him and to invite him to the conference concerning these events. Listen closely. And it was on the outcome of this that Beelzebub was now making the long journey on his ship, Karnak, from the planet Karadas to the planet Rivos. On this big spaceship, Karnak, the passengers, including the kinsmen and attendants of Beelzebub and many beings who served on the ship itself, during the period to which this tale refers, all the passengers were occupied either with their duties or simply with the actualization of what is called being mentation. Among all the passengers aboard the ship was one handsome boy who was conspicuous. He was always near Beelzebub himself. This was Hussein, the son of Beelzebub's favorite son, Ulorf. After his return home from exile, Beelzebub had seen this grandson of his, Hassan, for the first time, and appreciating his good heart, he took an instant liking to him. And as the time happened to coincide with the time of his reason, little Hassan needed to be developed. Beelzebub, having a great deal of free time there, undertook the education of his grandson. That's why it's Beelzebub's tales to his grandson. At the time of the narrative, Beelzebub with Hassan and his devoted servant Ahun, who always accompanied him everywhere, were seated on the highest kasnik on the upper deck of the ship Karnak, under the Callicrocus, somewhat resembling what we should call a large bell. And were talking among themselves while observing the boundless space. Beelzebub talking about the solar system where he had passed long years, and Beelzebub was describing the peculiarities of the nature of the planet Venus. The Most High Commission came to our planet Mars, since it was the nearest to the planet Earth, he said, and from this planet of ours began its investigations. The sacred members of the Most High Commission at once quieted us by saying that the apprehended danger of a catastrophe on a great cosmic scale had already been passed, but there were two fragments, basically from this cosmic crash. Two fragments, the larger one was named Lunderpur, and the smaller one, Anulios. And the ordinary beings who afterward arose and formed on this planet also called them by these names, but the beings in later times call them different names in different periods. In most recent times, the larger fragment became known to be called the moon. But the name of the smaller has gradually been forgotten. As for the beings there now, he said, not only have they no name at all for this smaller fragment, but they do not even suspect its existence. It's interesting to notice here that the beings of a continent on that planet called Atlantis, which afterwards perished, still knew of this second fragment of their planet and called it Anulios. But the beings of the last period of the same content, for whom the results of the consequences and properties of that organ called Kundabuffer, about which it now seems I shall have to explain to you in great detail, had begun to be crystallized and to become part of their common presences. Contemporary three-brained beings on this peculiar planet do not know of this former fragment of their planet, chiefly because its comparatively small size and remoteness of the place of its movement make it quite invisible to their sight, and also because no grandmother ever told them that once upon a time such a little satellite of their planet was known. And if any of them should by chance see it through their good but nevertheless child's toy of a telescope, he would pay no attention to it, for they would simply mistake it for a big aerolite. The contemporary beings will probably never see it again, since it has become quite proper to their nature to see only unreality. Let us give them their due. During the recent centuries, they've really most artistically mechanized themselves to see nothing real. So, my boy, owing to all the aforesaid, there first arose on this planet Earth, as there should be called, those that are called similitudes of the whole, or as they are called microcosmoses. And further, there were formed among these microcosmoses what are called palormic vegetations, and so on. He goes, and he goes on to talk about the microcosmoses and how they relate to world creation. And he finishes it up in this strange way. It says, meanwhile, know that these three-brained beings arising on the planet Earth who interest you had in them in the beginning the same possibilities for protecting and perfecting the functions of the acquisition of being and reason. But afterwards, just in the period when they also, as it proceeds on other similar planets of our great universe, were just beginning gradually to be spiritualized by being instinct. Just then, unfortunately for them, there befell a misfortune, which was unforeseen from above and most grievous for them. And this relates to the moon and Anulios. So here, I would just say, in terms of way of interpretation, that you have the moon and then this smaller fragment, Anulios, which we have forgotten about. And Gurdjieff is giving us a hint there, a la 12th planet type hint, but he's also giving us a hint of an eighth sphere type piece. And you can see, if you start to look at what was happening with the advent of the mystery schools into the 19th and 20th century and their effect on us moving into the 21st century, the entire setup for the spiritualization of this incredibly technological culture that we've arrived at is there, and it's waiting to be picked up. As Steiner himself said, if we fail here during World War I, and he gives the speech in 1920, he essentially had felt that the mystery schools had failed coming public, and said in 100 years, there's a window. So the window is there, and the material is there, and you have to seek it out, and you have to find the potent aspects of it. The questions that are raised are too important to be left in the hand of CIA materialist meddlers, counterintelligence people, Peter Thiel's, insane corporate overlords. You're talking about human history and your entire relation to the cosmos. So yes, you're going into a very different place when you apply the mystery school aspect to this. And with that, Miss Olivia, your last question of the evening.
I'm not going to end on a question. I'm going to end on a comment.
Yeah.
Sergeant Honeybadger says, I can't stress enough how much I love the Ideas Room. I live for Friday nights connecting the dots with you all. God bless DJ, Miss Olivia, and the Ideas Room.
Wow. I'll tell you, it's great to be here with everybody. And I think now more than ever, the things that we've shared over the past few years really coming to fruition. And even at times as a lone outpost, and then thank God the lone outpost with super friends that we've reached out to, and some of the fantastic people that we have working with us on the show. I want to make this point too. I mentioned Blue earlier. And when I got to those points about Amaryllis Fox Kennedy and the things that Tulsi Gabbard had done in relation to seeking out records relating to the Blue program and all the rest of it, the fact that they're both gone now tells me that the Blue piece in the government, which was stronger than ever during the Kennedy administration, and Blue secret programs in the UFO file being at the heart of the assassination of President Kennedy, we're in a weird, very strange loop that's been running now 62 odd years on that front. So you can see that loop continue with even someone related with the Kennedy name going to look for this stuff, and now they're out. So it tells you a great deal about what's at stake in terms of all this. Before we go, super chats, you're up. Miss
Super
Olivia.
chats coming up. Give me a second. Okay. Thomas Ball, Harry Zeri, Dallas Ferguson, Helena Wilcox, Wolfgang McCarthy, Daniel Consago, Eliza Maui, Eurythmia's Fun, Travis West, Chris Seven Brook, Ray Story, Alarmanine Bay, M. Brox, Doyle Wayne, McHatton, Erica Swenson Elliott, Anana Mouse, Mike Brosnahan, Indgoat, Debbie McAdoo, Amarillo Gunrunner, Nelthan, and Professor Hamamoto. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Wow. Fantastic support. And to all our subscribers, thank you. We couldn't do the work that we do without you. And I also want to say, it's not to lose hope, because with all the things we've reported on tonight, we still have the incredible minds working here in the Ideas Room. And, we have incredible people, incredible allies like Gigi Young, and incredible thinkers like Dr. Farrell and others. And to have all that on our side, wow, what a big deal. I'll do a couple of shout outs here before we leave. And DJ Book Club, there you go. I've got a book for you. That just reminds me that I didn't read the quote from the Aztec book, but it's okay, because I'm going to do an Aztec thing. And I have a whole thing about Silas Newton that you won't believe, because it's not anywhere. I've looked deep for it, and I found this one piece thing that nobody seems to know about. And of course, Newton is Newton from The Man Who Fell to Earth, who Bowie played. I mean, it gets since we mentioned Alternative 3 earlier, that's the Leslie Watkins book, which tries to take the fiction part and make it nonfiction. It's a worthwhile book, no question about it. And that, of course, that's Project Mars, Technical Tale by Von Braun, telling us all about Mr. Musk. Yeah. Musk indeed. Let's see what we got here. Scarlet Fire. Okay. That's interesting. There we go. Jolly great show, DJ Miss Olivia. Thank you for the elevated dialogue. I like that. I think that what I'll do is I'll steal elevated dialogue from you, and I'll take Giorgiani's route, and I'll just repeat it like it was my own. No, I won't. It's a great term, though. I think you should start something called elevated dialogue. Tantrika 07, 007. Anyone else see that? Interesting. Orbs aplenty. I miss him. I wonder who they were talking about up there.
Can I throw something out here?
Yes.
Okay. How Pauser says,
Righteous Might is another pickle. Corky Goss. Go ahead.
Jesus was the first human potential movement leader. Quote, "Whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these because I am."
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I love thinking of Jesus
if you go to the
that
New
way.
Testament, he says, if you say to this mountain, stand up and go, the mountain will stand up and go. I mean, that's that's the power of positive thinking for sure. Let's see. War never works. I like that. Corky Goss again. Good one. Wars are failures. Excellent point. Yeah, wars are to be avoided. And the groups that enjoy the wars, you need to starve them, not give them more power in society. We already have enough problems. And of course, as President Kennedy knew, we cannot afford to fight a war where even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. He said it so perfectly. What are you going to do? Amen, Scarlet Fire. There you go. And someone says, Jesus is indeed. Aha, you got Najat out there. Good night, dear X-Fam. Wow, fantastic. See who else we got here. The fourth way is the teachings of Jesus. It's true. As a matter of fact, Gurdjieff called it esoteric Christianity. In fact, let's see. Wars equal we are right. Right. Goodbyes are never fun. Well, listen, we'll be back next week. Club of Rome, indeed. Excellent subject matter. No question about it at all. Great group out there. Nikki Malone. Let's see. Who else do we have? Thank you for another excellent show tonight, DJ and Olivia. Johnny Ricardo. Johnny's out there. Great to see you, Johnny. And Johnny, be good. Let's see who else we got. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. Project Mars Bar. There you go. Rotten Cryptobytes. The joke of the evening. Somebody really has to come through with a big joke, though. Let's see if you can do it right at the end. Good joke. Good one-liner. Ideas Room has many facets. Indeed, Scarlett. My son's initials are War 3. Wow. I think he got me. He got me there. That's pretty intense. Well, see, there could be all kinds of karmic reasons for that. Leyline Wars, Austin Temple. Indeed. Now you're getting somewhere. Now you're really getting into it. Wow, fantastic. And multipotent, is that it? Yes. Zadie gets the quote of the night right there. Miss Olivia?
Do you want to mention Dr. Farrell's part 2?
Yes. Coming up and available in the newsletter. Look for the newsletter in your newsletter. And we will also be back with you next week. And we have some exciting things coming up for you for June as well. Have a fantastic Memorial Day. And after all, it says end broadcast, but you know what?
Never really ends.
It never really ends. And never let it be forgot. Once there was a Camelot, and there can be again, if we're willing to handle and take on the mantle of that piece of destiny of history. And we're already there. That's the thing. We just need to recognize our own abilities in that regard. Thank you, Jenny Jen. And we will see you all next week. Have a fantastic Memorial Day. And here is a salute to our heroes who have passed before.
Yep.
Thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you soon.
God bless.